This story happened a long time ago in the warm fall of 92 years ago. Deputy Sal Cheon said it was time. The time has come for the invasion of Zhongyuan. The Murim alliance is in chaos. The faction has split, and its members are now engaged in a power struggle. It was time for the Heavenly Demon Holy School to act now, while war broke out between them. Sal Cheon only asked the leader for permission to capture the Union minions. However, the 16th leader, Ku Ok-kyung, who was reading then, turned him down and kicked him out. Sal Cheon could not disobey him and reluctantly complied with the order and walked away from his chambers. After that conversation, another 10 years passed, and the deputy came to see him again. Yi said that members of the Se clan had taken over several roads and confronted the Jian clan. Right now, another great opportunity could turn things around for us. But Ku Ok-kyung shook his head negatively again. He was utterly absorbed in thoughts of martial arts. A lot of time passed, but the deputy's request did not stop. He returned to the head and did not understand why he was in such a shanty town. After 15 years, the deputy informed him that the number of absolute Zhongyuan warriors did not exceed 10 people. But the head of the Heavenly Demon School wasn't listening to him, and the deputy realized it. This time, he thought about how worthwhile it was to eat tansuyuk. Sal Cheon was the 16th deputy chief. After 31 years, a new deputy was appointed in his place. The new deputy was very pushy and called himself Chil Wol-sung. Later, he came to the supervisor. He planned to cause turmoil in his opponent's environment without fighting him. The deputy said to put one of the leader's secret books to them, and the country would be dissension. The old man asked for the right to give orders, which made Ku Ok-kyung very angry. During this time, the theory of how to become one of the 10 warriors of Murim in just 1 month appeared. Chil Wol-sung did not relent and asked to be allowed to take over the leadership of several commanders to crush the alliance. He pissed off the supervisor, and he promised to have him thrown in the Shaolin Temple for religion if he ever came again. His subordinates stopped harassing him only after rumors that he would shave the head of anyone who came to him again. A year passed, and Ku Ok-kyung realized he had accomplished everything. He thought of joining the Immortals, but doubted that there would be anything more interesting than an earthly body. He decided to reach a level of martial arts that no one in Murim's history had ever achieved. This level was to surpass the depth or escape demon, and this became a matter of life. One had to reach the sacred demon level or the demon god level. He was sure that everything would work out this time, even though he had already experienced more than 25,000 failures. But luck was on his side this time. A miracle happened, and he rose above the ground. Because the only right thing to do was to let all the internal energy flow outward. His energy was so powerful now that she realized that nothing would have worked out without her. Now the head of the Heavenly Demon School only had to soar beyond consciousness into deep space. He thought that even the founder of the Heavenly Demon School had fallen in front of the entrance. But he gathered his strength and rushed to a level no Murim warrior had ever reached. From then on, he must maintain maximum unconsciousness and create a protective barrier around himself. Ku Ok-kyung is trying to figure out who the creature behind the gate is and what world it's in, and he hears a woman's voice. In addition to the woman's voice, someone else's voice promised to send him to the other side of the world, so the leader couldn't concentrate. These voices keep bothering him, and he's afraid the barrier will not hold. He's at his limit. And then his nerves couldn't take it anymore, and he started screaming and shouting loudly for the Mu to stop interfering. He was trying to figure out who was bothering him with his chronic, and kept asking who it was. The supervisor was on edge, yelling for him to come out to him, but nothing happened. At that moment, the voices subsided, and Ku Ok-kyung thought they might be from the celestial world. Suddenly, an incomprehensible force grabbed his leg and wrapped it higher and higher. He was terrified, but could do nothing about it. The charge was incredible. The rays of light grabbed the head of the Heavenly Demon School. He could not unhook them. He has to forcefully weaken his level, or he will become a celestial and stay there forever. But in the blink of an eye, something happened that he didn't expect. Someone interrupted him, but who was it? It was the one who tried to save him and asked him to run because he was already being searched for all over space. Something incomprehensible happened to the manager. He couldn't do anything about it. He fell to the ground and couldn't move. He thought it was the end. It turned out that the celestial demon had fallen into a Chuhwarima state and had been in it for a month. This event shocked everyone, and there was a riot in the central division of the Murim Union. Union warrior Murim arrived at a Union unit and stormed to its head to find out everything. Her name is Chegal Yujin, and she arrived when she received the letter from the carrier pigeon. She was so scared and surprised that she barged into the chapter and disrespected her. But the head of the unit was wise. He asked if a private person could come, and Chigal Yujin apologized for her behavior. She couldn't believe what she had read in the letter the pigeon had sent her. She asked if it was true. Is it true that a terrible tragedy happened to the great master of the Kunlun mountain range, one of the 100 strongest warriors? The head of the union struggled to say this. After a little silence, he replied that the body had not yet been removed. Chigal Yujin was horrified, and the words of the chapter resounded in her mind, confirming that what was written in the letter was true. She argued that it was necessary right now, but the head was calm. He gathered the 9 great clans and the 5 great families. She could not understand where the enemies were now. The head replied that they had gone to Tibet. She heard what she feared most. They were now in the Heavenly Demon's holy school. Immediate rescue action was needed, and the head began to think about what to do. Everything was happening in Tibet. The main stronghold of the Heavenly Demon Sacred School was in danger. The chapter was horrified that the enemies had crushed even the Hidden Steel Soul Group. The warriors said that they were massacred, but the fighters continued to fight, but they would not last long. The elder assured that even demonic creatures were insignificant and could be defeated. It was a question of putting 3 combat squads, each consisting of first-class warriors, into battle and observing the result. The elder said that they numbered a few tens of thousands, and the other troops were already dead. But no one was sure that in such a situation, the best fighters would be able to win. The fighters knew that Tibet had never seen such a monster before, and that they had no idea how to defeat it. They did not understand these types or why they should die without even knowing the reason. It was not clear what to do. The head assured that one of the squads had already entered the fray, and they only had to wait for news. Unexpectedly, the head of this squad, Hyung Yun, appeared to report the situation. The head hurriedly asked what was happening there and if the enemy attack had been repelled. Hyung said that their squad stood for 15 minutes and was defeated. The squad tried to destroy them, but the monsters were getting bigger and bigger. He apologized to the deputy because he didn't know how to help him or what to do. The head was confused and asked if the head knew about it, but he did not receive a reply. The 16th leader began to be called the Heavenly Demon instead of his real name because he was firm. Everyone was at a loss and didn't know what to do. They couldn't even give the head an answer. Even if he had come, they could not face him, and to report such a disgrace, they would not have been better off dead. On the top floor of the unit, an unfamiliar sound, like someone's footsteps, was suddenly heard. The head realized something was about to happen, but no one could know what it was. When he saw it, he was numb with fear and amazed at what kind of creature it was. The impact on the subdivision was so strong and powerful that it destroyed all the upper floors. This giant black creature broke through the division in one fell swoop and was next to the warriors. What was that? Nobody realized it was an enemy attack. The important thing is that the head is okay. The enormous red eyes were full of rage and stared with anger at the head of the unit. This monster blew the roof off in an instant. He Young's unit immediately recognized it as the same monster. The monster struck first. His jaws opened, and he was ready to demolish everything in his path. He was of enormous stature, and the warriors were given an order. The Heavenly Demon Sacred School was to end. The order was to fight to the last fighter. Even if all the warriors died, do not stop. On the other side of the headquarters, Ku Ok Kyung came to his senses near a river. He was dehydrated and drank from this body of water. He reflected that he could resist, even though he had to lose the inner energy that had cost him thousands of years. He could only survive by pressing the acupuncture point and paralyzing his body, thereby lowering his energy by 1 level. As a result, he fell into the state of Chukvaima, which was a hellish pain, but thereby avoided the road to the world of the Celestials. Things didn't go according to plan. He couldn't concentrate, and so he didn't reach the level of a holy demon. He still couldn't figure out who the voices belonged to. On the side of the headquarters from behind the mountain, explosions and rumbles were heard that echoed throughout the area. Ku Ok Kyung had not yet come to his senses and couldn't understand what was happening or where the sounds were coming from. When he realized it was coming from outside the headquarters, he thought they'd finally grown up. It had to be practiced like this from the beginning, and he knew that making a fuss didn't mean they had gotten stronger. You had to understand the whole point to understand what was going on there, or else you'd be in trouble. Kuoke-ken saw a large monster with enormous wings hovering to the side of the headquarters. He could not know what it was, but the creature looked like a dragon from afar. The so-called dragon flew towards the headquarters and thus carried danger to them. The monster looked terrifying, with big red eyes and an enormous maw with sharp teeth. But the worst part was that a real demon was sitting on this monster and controlling this dragon. Instead of a head, there was a bare skull with red glittering eyes and white old age hair, a crown of bones, and anger sparked from it. The headquarters was almost wholly destroyed. Everything was burning in flames, and there was total devastation. The Grand Mage of Granada was very angry and was willing to go to any lengths to defeat the dragon. He drew his sword and stabbed the dragon right in the neck with all his strength and anger without giving it a chance to move. The dragon fell to the floor with a clatter, covering all the space around them. They asked if it was his choice. He didn't think Granada's great magician Rivers would meet such a low end, but he knew how it would turn out. Even in the last few minutes, the dragon acted arrogant. The mage asked what he was after and if he would become a lich. The main thing is that he has no regrets, and the mage strikes one last blow with his sword. There was complete silence. The dragon was gone, and the mage finished his dirty work and started to leave. Rivers, the Grand Mage of Granada, commands the master of the demonic world, the great demon Ilguero. The mage asks to make a deal with him and is willing to give anything, even a foul dragon's heart. The headquarters building was completely destroyed, just before the mage asked for the power to destroy the dragon race. The same demon called the Lich King infiltrated the headquarters, or what's left. He threw his ice arrows at the head, destroying everything around him and exterminating all the warriors. These were devilish creatures. King Lich won this fight. It was no problem for him. He asked if they thought they could go unpunished for what they had done. The head of the Celestial Division didn't want to give up. His strength was leaving him, but he didn't show any sign of it. The last thing he thought was that he was ashamed in front of Mr. Supervisor. King Lich turned to the head and said that when the leader arrived, no one would be left there. He called the head an inferior creature and said that he was talking nonsense even in his last moments. The king asked his subordinates if everything was settled, and they replied that they had left no one in this world. He was satisfied that there would be no more trouble, and decreed that they would destroy everyone they encountered in the building. At this very moment, Mephisto's servant arrived with his report and began to narrate. Since they couldn't find traces of the golden dragon nearby, they activated their tracking magic to the maximum. However, these words were followed by an ambiguous statement, and the king became furious. Mephisto continued that problems existed due to the nature of the mana they had sensed and its constant evaporation in the quest. The servant reported no traceability and apologized because this might be the only place the golden dragon could have escaped. The king realized that the traditional method of mana control was not widely used in this world, and he had not expected it at all. He gathered mana from his heart, which helped him reach the headquarters of such an army. The king gave orders to deploy the quest anew. Despite the unexpected events due to a lack of information, he was sure there was a lot to play with in this world. The king could not believe some warriors could defeat a dragon in a land without mana supply using the Tree of Life. Everyone here possessed the skills of swordmasters. The king activated his power. Lich was happy to deal with the head since he was in charge here, and many monsters, including skeletons, had suffered at their hands. He exulted that the jihad did not stand, and even the half-human, half-monster that fought on the front lines had fallen. The Lich has given orders to find the bodies of the strongest people, and they will try to get them back on their feet. The servants found such a body and brought it to the king, from which they would begin their work. The king spoke of a conspiracy over the lying man and gave the order to rise. He granted him a new life. At this very time, Ku Ok-kyung, the leader, arrived, but no one noticed him. He will now serve in all things to his master, King Lich, in this body. Suddenly, King Lich heard quiet, smooth footsteps. He could not even understand where they came from. Ku Ok-kyung said everything that puzzled him softly and very calmly. He looked around. There wasn't a living soul, and he turned to ask how to make sense of it. There was no reply to this. Far away in the corner sat the Lich King, and the leader was brooding. Lich couldn't understand where the so-called humans had come from because they had killed everyone in the building. Ku Ok-kyung pondered over the fact that he hadn't sensed this devil's approach and didn't understand how he could hide his traces of presence. But his thoughts were interrupted when he saw Deputy Chon Wol-sung lying on the floor. The last time he had visited the deputy 31 years ago, it meant that Cheon Wol-sung had left unfairly, in his opinion. Ku Ok-kyung always said that the deputy should start practicing instead of fighting in a battle of the ranks and trying to capture Marim. The deputy lost to some demons because he didn't listen to the leader. Suddenly, the king's servants gathered around to deal with Ku Ok-kyung and finish him off. The servants were monsters that the king had subdued, and they were getting closer and closer to the leader. But he was calm and waited for the right time to deal with them for good. One of the monsters swooped down from above with such power and force, it was ready to smash the leader. but received the most decisive rebuff with a fist. Ku-ok-kyung hit him, and he flew far back. Ku-ok-kyung didn't even feel the monster's strength and thought it was some kind of insect. This pissed off the other monsters, and they pounced on him, and a real massacre began. After the light had consumed him, Ku-ok-kyung was ready for anything and not afraid of these demons. The monsters struck from all sides and fought with everything they could get their hands on. Ku-ok-kyung fought back with only his hands. His strength was enough to deal with them. Since they were so willing to die, he used a demonic attack that had incredible power. With this attack, he defeated all the monsters in one hit and didn't even notice it. But that wasn't the end of the attack from above. He looked up to see who was there. They were making strange noises, and Ku-ok-kyung assumed they were bats. They flew closer, and they were monsters with dragon-like wings and empty eyes. The leader used his attack again. There was an explosion, and everything around was on fire. Nothing could be seen. Ku-ok-kyung was surprised by the monster's attacks, and they even seemed funny. He thought them insignificant little ones and was confident of his victory over them. His school was useless this time. Ku-ok-kyung used a demonic small arm attack. Everything around him was destroyed with the leader's attack, but that wasn't the end. At that very moment, the Lich King appeared, their gazes crossed, and Ku-ok-kyung was surprised. King Lich was ready to fight Ku-ok-kyung and was confident he would win. The leader had been waiting for the bony head to engage him. King Lich did not rush to fight, but turned to the leader and called him brave. He introduced himself as the King of Cold in that world and said that he came from the continent of Granada in the third dimension. He also said that he was chasing a golden dragon, which is why he was in this place. Ku-ok-kyung didn't know what he was talking about. Lich admired Ku-ok-kyung's energy user skills, but warned that he couldn't handle his army. So he suggests that he become a servant of his body and then receive sacred, eternal life. The king waited for Ku-ok-kyung's response and was sure that the leader would agree to the proposal. In the same tone, Ku-ok-kyung remained calm and asked them if they were destroying his house and talking about some kind of immortality. Ku-ok-kyung agreed, but first he wanted to give something to the king too. Ku-ok-kyung stated that the gift would be quick and should be appropriately accepted. Then the king said he would at least let him die painlessly from his roux, but he couldn't finish. Sloa was interrupted by a powerful punch from Ku-ok-kyung that shattered King's jaw. The leader did not wait for the conversation to end and struck first with such force that the king could not even recover. Ku-ok-kyung struck blow after blow to finally put an end to this horrible demon. The Lich King wasn't prepared for such a strong attack. He couldn't even hit back. In the distance, a voice called out to the king, but the Lich couldn't even stand up. The manager called him a lowlife and did his best to prevail. He couldn't believe that such a worthless type had wiped out everyone in the headquarters. From a single blow, the king fell off but called himself immortal. Ku-ok-kyung thought he had defeated the unlucky one, but what happened then? Suddenly the king came to his senses and flew high up. Ku-ok-kyung couldn't believe it. And the Lich used the most dangerous weapon of all, a hellfire that could instantly destroy everything. That's when the leader realized it was a fire of annihilation and got worried. First, there was a massive explosion, and fire engulfed everything around. Nothing could be seen. When the fire went out, smoke filled the entire floor. The king was pleased that he had chosen hellfire. He laughed and said the brave man's stupidity had ruined him, and Mephisto waited for the following instructions. The king wasted no time on the brave man and ordered them to assemble at headquarters. They had nothing else to do. But Ku-ok-kyung was much stronger and more resilient than he seemed, and he called out to the king, shocking him. The leader could not understand how such a lowly, bony parasite could use the fire of destruction. Lich had completely lost his mind, or he couldn't believe how Ku-ok-kyung had survived this. They were both not ready to give up. The king was preparing a new blow that would not leave the leader alive. Ku-ok-kyung was ready for anything because the king didn't know he was dealing with an immortal. Lich said he'd wipe him out this time and leave no trace of him, and that was just the beginning of that fight. The headquarters building was destroyed so severely that you could see the full moon illuminating the room. And as the Lich took decisive action, he brought another of his weapons to bear. It was a shield of death. He launched it directly towards Ku-ok-kyung, but received a stiff rebuff. The next strike was behind the leader, and he threw a fireball straight at the king. But the Lich used strong magic and created a safe orb with himself in it. However, he managed to injure the king, which made him even more excited, so he called Ku-ok-kyung a bastard, and activated reverse gravity, which boomeranged all power and strength back into the leader. Ku-ok-kyung had never seen anything like this before. He couldn't understand what it was, but wanted to strike again. Gravity lifted him, and the king began controlling him like a puppet. He reversed the action, and as a result, Kuok-kyung may have gotten hurt. The king wanted to send this dumbass idiot to the afterlife, but something went wrong. Kuok-kyung was already furious at such an insolent person and considered defeating him. Then, the thought of activating an extremely harsh energy crossed his mind. The king was unclear about what Kuok-kyung was planning, but the move had already been thought out in detail. At that moment, Kuok-kyung and the Lich King rushed toward each other to finally deal with each other. Blow after blow, they fought in this battle, and the leader smacked the king in his bony head. But in return, he received a blow of such force that he could not resist and fell. The blows were so powerful that the walls shuddered and crumbled into small crumbs on impact. Kuok-kyung fell to the floor below from the impact, punching through the stone walls. He had to do something or he would lose this fight, but he didn't want to give up. But the difficulty was that Chukwuema had him bound hand and foot and needed a plan. Kuok-kyung rose to his feet again and stood before the Lich King in full strength. Lich can't believe he has to fight this hard in this dimension because he's indestructible and strong. He wondered what made this man so powerful and why he couldn't destroy him. It infuriated him that a mere mortal had the nerve to pull an immortal against him. Since magic and weapons did not help, the king decided to destroy Kuok-kyung with his own hands. The leader's strength was already running out, and it was hard to move, but Lich was full of strength and energy. Kuok-kyung summoned his energy pathways and realized he couldn't win with simple techniques. He knew a technique that had not been practiced, but it was about the energy of the released Big Bear, which absorbs all the internal energy. The king recognized that their powers were equal, but would still find a way to destroy him. Lich's mouth never closed, and Kuok-kyung suggested that he attack first and move into action. He would fight back as best he could. The demon drew his sword, swung with all his might, and told him not to regret his words. He activated a meteor blaster of enormous size and incredible strength with his sword. Kuok-kyung saw that it was such a vast thing that filled the entire area. He didn't think this monster could create such a huge joke. If he had known that all this would happen, he would have come only after restoring his internal energy, because Kuok-kyung had not yet reached the level of a sacred demon. It was an invaluable experience for him, and he immediately decided that the level could be reached in the next life, and that now it was necessary to fight with one's own strength. And a plan of action appeared in his mind, which he happily began to put into action. The Lich King was not ready to give up. With all his devilish strength, he started the fight and rushed straight at the leader. They had nothing to lose and fought in a terrible fight using all their abilities. Kuok-kyung gathered all his strength into one stream and struck at the giant meteor blaster. Still, at this moment, he was finally exhausted. The blaster collapsed on the headquarters, shattering everything into small pieces, leaving nothing but a spot from the fall of this huge thing. After the fall, there was an explosion, and everything wasn't dark like night. At that moment, a young girl footstepped into the woods not far away from where she had come from at that time. She heard an explosion, which led her to the forest. In a long robe, she walked through the forest to see what had happened. The moon was filled with blackness. She thought it was a lunar eclipse, but later realized its mana was gone. She opened the portal and couldn't believe her eyes, and then she realized that he was already... She stared through it for a long moment and only then asked the most critical question. She could not believe her eyes and could not understand who had stopped them. There was devastation at the headquarters site. The survivors heard the stranger's voice and saw the portal, but they could not understand how this was possible. When they came closer, the stranger was frightened and asked who was there, but she didn't notice them. They surrounded her and threatened her with weapons. They aimed to figure out who she was and how she got there. They asked where she was from and what she was doing there during such a turbulent time. She was surprised at their agility without magic and thought these people. The warriors kept questioning her. When the person in charge came up, she asked what was going on. The troopers said there was a suspicious person walking around the area. Chegal Yujin asked to speak to her, but the fighters feared something might happen. She calmed them down and ordered them to step aside. Chegal Yujin realized that the girl was not lost by her appearance and repeated the question of who she was and what she was doing there. But the girl was silent. The soldier asked if she could speak, but the stranger only opened one eye. Without saying anything, the girl raised her hand. At this moment, Chegal Yujin was startled but did not interrupt her. The fighters ordered the stranger and hands off and said it was dangerous for Chegal, but she reported that she was fine. Energy traveled through Chegal Yujin and everyone nearby from the palm of the stranger's hand. She asked if the soldiers were alive and well. Luckily, they were surprised by what they saw. The girl from the forest said it was nice to meet you, and she came from another dimension. Chigul Yu Jin assumed she had caused all the chaos, but the stranger said that wasn't true. She said that she opened the door through the dimensions to escape him, but the soldier couldn't understand who she was talking about. She would later realize that the stranger confirmed that she sought refuge from him. Then the fighters asked if she could cooperate with them. The girl gladly agreed and had a lot to give them. The Soldats wondered what the name of this stranger from another dimension was. She introduced herself as Ligweather, and everyone went into a stupor from what they heard. They weren't expecting it. She pulled off the hood of her robe and opened her eyes. Lig asked to be called by her first name since it would be more comfortable. Since that day, 140 years had passed and everything was on fire. Monsters were walking the streets and grabbing people. The monster grabbed one of the passers-by who was trying to buy time and save his son and yelled at him to run away. He shouted once more for Li Han to run away from that place, but he couldn't understand why he was still standing. Li Han was terrified. His mom and dad were in the clutches of horrible monsters and couldn't get out. He didn't understand what was happening. The monster noticed the boy and was ready to rush after him to send him to the other side of the world. His father's last words were for Li Han to run away. A minute later, he was gone. The monster broke the house's roof and took off after the boy. Li Han ran away from the place with all his legs and cried. He ran down a narrow forest path, and this demon with dragon wings flew after him. Li Han had to hide somewhere before the evil demons caught him and found him. But he was running so fast he didn't look under his feet and tripped over a tree root, and fell to the ground, face down, flying farther along the roots. The boy was scared and sobbed and begged the monster not to come near him. But that didn't stop the demon from seeing Li Han lying there, and they quickly flew over to him. Li Han swung his sword that was in his hands and struck at the monster. He had not expected such a thing. The monster's fingers were destroyed and thrown far away. The demon froze in place in an instant, stunned by what was happening, and did not move any closer to the boy. The monster roared in pain and horror that his fingers were gone. He couldn't move. Li Han couldn't believe that his sword was not simple and worked against the gurgle monster. Li Han was a sophomore at the Martial Arts Academy and was able to stop the gurgle. However, they were told it was beyond the strength of even 3 Kanho warriors. When the demon came to his senses, he was ready to tear the poor boy to pieces at the pranks he had done. Li Han ordered the demon to attack him, and although he was scared, he found nowhere to go. He immediately remembered everything he had been taught at the academy. He shifted his body weight to his left leg while maintaining his balance in the stance. Li Han was ready to defend himself and assumed a pose when the demon came closer and closer, and the boy attacked him. He was terrified but gathered all his courage in his fist and did as he was taught. He used a sword technique called Boundless Sky, the 7th movement. But the demon, leaving no trace, managed to dodge the blow and rushed at Li Han, and delivered a mighty blow to the boy right in the back. It was a hell of a pain for him. Li Han flew away from the force of the blow to the Lich, right onto the lying rocks, and lost consciousness. It was unclear how long he had been unconscious and where the monster was going. After being hit by the gargoyle, he still came to his senses, which requires not shifting his weight to his left leg, but directing all the force to his right side. He didn't have the strength to hold even a blade, but he promised himself that he must slay at least this monster with his strength. He decided to avenge his parents by all means, and before he attacked, he apologized to them. He was ready to die on the spot, but only ready to go to the other world with this monster. Li Han mumbled out of his last strength that at least this monster would be his traveling companion in hell. Suddenly, an unknown voice rang out, saying that Li Han had failed this time too. The boy took his sword and began to look at who was there near him and whose voice was talking to him he could not understand. The voice continued talking to the boy, and he was glad he could hear him. The voice informed him that if he went backwards, he would come across a shallow river roll, and then he should go down and see a small hole. The voice ordered the boy to run now to escape this thing. The monster jumps out of the bushes and rushes after Li Han to chase him down and destroy him. But the boy listened to the voice and ran with all his might down the path the stranger had dictated. Li Han dashed so the demon wouldn't catch up with him. Finally, he saw the roll and the hole the voice had told him about. He reached a small river, at which point the monster was very close and almost caught up with the boy. But Li Han still hadn't found it. The voice pointed out where it was, and he finally saw it. Once near him, he couldn't figure out where the gargoyle was and couldn't believe he had broken away from it. Suddenly, the monster jumped out to him and was about to catch the boy to destroy him. But at that very moment, Li Han was already opening the magic hole he couldn't open, and he grumbled for it to open faster. Once inside, the boy flew downward at the speed of light, flying through the surrounding trees and bushes. A couple spans later, he collapsed to the ground with a thud, hitting his hand on the roots of a tree. His body felt like it was falling apart, but he at least caught his breath from the monster. Li-Han couldn't understand what voice was calling him and helping him escape. Suddenly, he heard it again, and the voice told him where to go. The boy asked who it was and where he was calling from under a tree. A man, sitting in the dark, said that Li-Han had finally found him. He couldn't believe that the voice calling him was himself. The voice replied that he didn't look very lively. Li-Han asked how he could talk to a disfigured and emaciated body, and Ku-ok-kyung replied that he knew such a thing as chronic. The boy couldn't believe it because Ku-ok-kyung was so far away from other people's eyes and was talking about a demon. Li-Han remembered that at the academy, they had talked about ferocious creatures that offered to make a deal, after which one did not want to stay alive. Li-Han heard the ferocious gurgle and turned around sharply. Ku-ok-kyung laughed at him because he feared such a worthless monster. The supervisor continued to chuckle and asked if he was such a coward. Li-Han got mad at him for that. The boy turned to the immobile man, not to pretend to know what the gargoyle creature Ku-ok-kyung was talking about. He clarified who he was talking about because two monsters were behind him, and Li-Han was dazed with fear. Then he slowly turned around to see it with his own eyes. There really were two of them. From what he saw, he was shocked and said quietly that this could not be it. The wyvern indiscriminately ripped apart anyone who invaded its territory. The boy didn't understand how to be. Ku-ok-kyung reminded him that he wanted to take revenge or had decided to die at the hands of that beast. Li-Han asked if there was a way to do it. Ku-ok-kyung said to take his hand so he could enter his body and finish off the monster, but the boy didn't believe his words. The leader replied that now he had no other choice. Li-Han was willing to die rather than let his body be stolen. The leader asked if he didn't crave retribution for the deaths of his parents. Li-Han was shocked at what he heard. How could this strange person or non-human know about it? Ku-ok-kyung realized that the boy was slightly taken aback. He could prove to the boy that these demons were nothing compared to him, but there was no reason to hope. He continued that the boy's soul would disappear by grabbing his hand, and the physical body would remain. Still, Ku and Ok-kyung promised to avenge the boy's parents. Li-Han remembered that his mother, frail and helpless, had lost her life to the clutches of those monsters. A father sacrificed himself to his last breath to save his son. He didn't understand why his seven would go through something like this. Shouldn't demons die for such terrible atrocities? He was furious, but the boy was angry at himself for his cowardly escape from the accident scene. Ku-ok-kyung promised to take revenge even if it cost him his life. He just couldn't otherwise. Li-Han grabbed his hand and asked if it was enough. The leader approved the choice and told him not to resist the incoming energy into his body. Ku-ok-kyung was afraid that two of their souls would be destroyed, so the choice was right. The boy was overwhelmed with energy. Li-Han asked for a last name so he would know at least the person's name, and Ku-ok-kyung identified himself. Heavenly Demon from what led to shocked the boy he did not believe his ears and asked again. Ku-ok-kyung said that he is the 16th head of the Heavenly Demon Sacred School, which means he is a heavenly demon himself. When the energy finally engulfed the boy, a bright flash of light appeared in the sky. Li-Han saw it, and it was mesmerizing. There was crying, and then Ku-ok-kyung heard the voices of the boy's parents saying that it was the process of his birth. Ku-ok-kyung was swept up in Li-Han's energy and went through the boy's entire life journey from birth. A voice in his head, "Daddy said it was me, your daddy." Finally, his little boy was born. Ku-ok-kyung realized it was Li-Han's memories. He had remembered everything since he was a baby. He must beware of the monsters he entered the academy, as he was scolded for coming there without skills as he studied the art of weapons. The heavenly demon was interested in that particular day, what happened and how it happened. And then he realized that he was in Li-Han's physical body, which was flying away in a bright flash. He couldn't believe what he saw and tried to stop Li-Han's body from crawling after him. It was impossible. He couldn't understand what was happening or what he should do. He wanted to grab and shout for him to stop and not fly away, but his hands reached for him. And he struck with all his might at the flash of light as it was. He could not give it to fly away, and on impact in a bright flash, it burst from colliding with his foot. And at that moment, Ku-ok-kyung felt an unbearable pain in his entire body, as if an electric current had passed through. While transitioning from one body to another, the monster was not far from Ku-ok-kyung. Smoke appeared around Ku-ok-kyo. Now the boy's body was in place of the leader's, and he was ready to fight the dragon in his new body. The sky dragon came to his senses, but his eyes remained closed. He touched his body with his hands and realized everything had worked out. This massive creature was ready to destroy the heavenly dragon and rush towards it. Kuok-kyung wondered why his martial arts level was so bad to Li Han. The monster flew upward and was ready to crush the boy's body with all its strength. Kuok-kyo was frightened because this creature seemed worthless to him until he encountered it. At one point, the monster opened its jaws, and fire rained down, burning everything in its path. He knew that Li Han's body wouldn't move the way he needed it to, but he still thought he could run one wide. The monster wound the celestial demon and hit him right in the shoulder. He saw this and opened his giant maw again, and fire filled everything around him. With his injured shoulder, Kuok-kyung ran with all his might to escape from that demon. But a wall was in his way, and a course of action immediately began to form in his mind. And then he did a somersault on this wall, ran up it, and flipped over on top of it. It was a great advantage because he found himself directly above this demon. He finally managed to match Li Han's body, doing a few somersaults and putting all his strength into his fist. And with all his strength, he bent the monster's neck, causing it to crunch and groan. Upon hitting the monster, the heavenly demon bumped into something hard and couldn't figure out what it was. It crunched right under his foot, and he thought it might be dragon scales. At that moment, the dragon swung its head, and Kuok-kyung flew off like a bullet. The heavenly demon was very agile and landed right on its feet after the throw. Kuok-kyung realized that his scales had dispelled the shock and was surprised that he had not reacted to the attack in any way. He couldn't believe he was hesitating because of the demonic creature. If he were in his body, he would have already used an energy attack. He was afraid his body wouldn't be able to withstand. And then he noticed a thing under his foot that he had accidentally caught when he jumped. He saw the blade and was very glad that it was now that she had gotten under his feet. He was joyful, saying that he had forgotten that there was this thing that could help him out. Kuok-kyung picked up the sword and said that Li Han hadn't even left a mark on the blade handle. The demon in the guise of a dragon once again began to attack the celestial demon. He had come very close to him and rushed from the side right at him. Kuok-kyung thought it was an evil, very resilient thing. Kuok-kyung can't use energy attacks, physical attacks are useless. And he swung his blade and shouted what the monster would say to the sword attack. He also suggested that he try to withstand this attack with Li Han's blade. The sky demon gained acceleration and threw himself so that the floor under his feet gathered in a heap. He tore toward the dragon so quickly that he didn't notice anything nearby. Finding himself quite close with a broad sword swing, he delivered his blow on this monster. It hit him right in the face, and pieces of his skin flew apart. The vast monster collapsed to the floor with a clatter, smoke billowing from its nostrils and eyes filled with anger. The punch wasn't deep enough, and Kuok-kyung decided to throw another decisive one. He filled the sword with his ethereal energy, making the blade glow and come to life in his hands, and struck another blow right in the middle of the dragon's head with such force and power as no one had ever seen. With such sword power, the demonic creature's head split into two instantly. It was the first form of the triple sword heavenly demon, and the reincarnation of the heavenly demon shadow sword flash. The undead were defeated by a heavenly demon in the body of a boy named Li Han. While wiping his mouth, Kuok-kyung reasoned it was still unfair of him. The dragon lay unconscious in the middle and didn't move. It was a victory over the monster. Kuok-kyung, the sky demon, proudly walked past him towards the exit. He was glad that he had won. After all, one of his talents was wielding a sword, which Li Han conveniently brought with him. And at that moment, he remembered his old blade and regretted not having it with him. He saw something at the spot where the dragon had been hit and wondered what it was, but something sticking out looked like a gemstone. And the celestial demon decided to see what was out there without getting dirty. He pulled the thing out and was confused. It was glowing, and in the middle was something yellow like a core. The object was blue and resembled a dragon's eye, as big and sharp as a pupil. The market was buzzing with sales warriors who chose weapons. Sellers guaranteed the quality of goods and asked not to hurry with the choice. Another vendor offered fabrics in a special material, strong tanned leather. They sold leather, gemstones, revitalizing mixtures, and even a rewritten treatise called Shan Hai Jing. Merchant Seok Sam looked around and thought Wachwon County was as lively as ever. He remembered how he traded here in a shop 10 years ago, and it was a hard time, but now this place brings back only fond memories. Seok Sam has been diligently saving until today and has finally opened his own store. He was overjoyed and called the department store by his own name. Isn't that wonderful? The merchant was very proud of himself and looked around his store when a heavenly demon approached him. The merchant looked him over but didn't rush to offer anything, waiting for Ku Ok-kyung to choose something. The sky demon read the names hanging on the wall, where there were the likes of a goblin orc, but couldn't figure out what they were. He stood with his chin held up, thinking why he would ever sell and buy such a thing. His thoughts were distracted by the voice of a merchant who welcomed him to his store. He said that the Juice Sam store thinks of customers first and asked what he wanted to buy. Ko Ok-kyung said he came to sell some small things instead of buying, but he didn't find such items on the list. The merchant was upset and thought it was okay because they had just opened. Suk Sam immediately criticized him, estimating that he looked not even 20 years old, his clothes were shabby, and he spoke on the first name at the first meeting. The merchant asked for the goods, but he didn't expect to see anything worthwhile. Thinking he was ignorant, he decided not to let him into the store. The sky demon gave the merchant what he found from the dragon. Suk Sam took a magnifying glass and looked at the merchandise. And he was simply speechless because it was a metallic wyvern magic stone. He didn't understand where a guy like that got this unique thing and turned to him. The merchant was already very polite, smiling, and asked to discuss the goods over a cup of tea. Thus, bringing the celestial demon into a slight confusion, he hesitated. But the agreed merchant couldn't believe his ears and told him to go inside. Last night, Ku Ok-kyung was sitting and thinking now that he had realized that these things are called monsters, and tried to use Li Han's memories to put the whole picture together. He remembered that it had been 140 years since he had fought the Bonehead. Then, Zhongyuan was infested by monsters, and the academy appeared. However, something still remained beyond his comprehension, as families and clans began to exchange martial arts techniques for the sake of the academy. Countless warriors have given their lives just to keep their secret books from being handed over. But now the exchange of books is going on quite peacefully. He realized that the answer was only one thing that had happened in 100 years that he could not yet understand. A scene from Li Han's life flashed through his mind as his classmates told him that he had just memorized all the textbooks. Someone said that now that we're in the same class, be prepared that when the semester starts, I'll kill half of them, but that wasn't the memory. The sky demon said that one should leave useless memories aside, and he wondered if there wasn't some moment that would give a clue. He thought for a long time, and then it dawned on him that the basis of magic is simple: measurements. You need to draw a line from the second dimension to the third. The celestial demon thought about the girl and whether her eyes were light or dark. The girl kept saying that one should look carefully and concentrate on mana at one point. Hearing this, he was shocked and realized this girl wasn't like that. The girl showed how to create fire from her finger, and then it became clear that this girl was not human. After all, humans cannot access such an incredible level of intelligence. Still, she has sage eyes and a perfect mind. The sky demon's mind was all jumbled up, and now he wondered if she had anything to do with that type. He breathed a sigh of relief that the most important things had been taken care of, and he would have to find out the rest personally. Ku Ok-kyung was very exhausted and wisely decided to let that go for now. The heavenly demon tried to restore its energy using reverse blood circulation. Still, only the energy of 30 years could be recovered. He realized that if you forcibly improve your skills, the body cannot stand it. Can you find and eat a miracle pill somewhere? Ku Ok-kyung summarized that he had an incomplete memory, an unstable soul, and a body unsuitable for improving quick skills. Thoughts ran through his head that he couldn't defeat that type in the usual way. 40 years ago, he applied the technique to the energy of a freed big bear, and it worked. Bonehead was destroyed, and I couldn't believe this could happen. A mere worthless mortal could defeat him and destroy the king's almighty magic. That's what Ku Ok-kyung had to do. He didn't seem to be finished, but he did manage to do a lot of damage. The heavenly demon thought about everything and decided it would be different this time. Although the situation has changed, he will no longer fall into Chuweima's clutches, but he will still fight him. He wanted to meet again with that girl and was sure he had something to do with King Lich. But first he decided to see how the world had changed over the years while he was gone. At this time, at Soksama department store, the merchant was saying goodbye to the customers and said that if they found anything, they should bring it to him. He received the money for the stone he sold, or the magic stone, though he didn't know it, and wondered where he would spend the money for just one stone sold. It used to be very convenient for him to get everything he wanted with a word or a hand gesture, but now he has to think about where to spend the money. No matter how much he dug into Li Han's memory, his only memories were of the walk from the dormitory to the academy, and the studies Ku Ok-kyung thought were boring. He believed that the boy didn't know real life at all, And now how could there be a heavenly demon in his body? He approached the booth and couldn't figure out what it was. Is it a description of mercenaries? He started reading about martial arts, their origins and experiences. He wondered what was happening to this world. Usually Murimek hid 30% of his abilities, but people are openly advertising themselves here. The heavenly demon had 500 nannies and needed about 300 on average to hire. And he had a brilliant plan to find a mercenary and dump all the dusty work on him instead of doing it himself. When he began to realize his plan and thought about who he should choose, he paid attention to one of the photos. The ad stated that the cost was 450 nannies, and the origin of the Heavenly Demon Sacred School hiring time was 15 days. Childock was ready to receive a visitor at the Warrior Treasure Shop. Lighting a pipe, the man with the mustache invited his visitor to join him and prepared to listen to him. The young man escorted the celestial demon to the Squamous Elder through a small room. The elder saw Ku Ok Kyung and said there was a new face in the establishment. He assumed that this was the first time Ku Ok Kyung had seen the biographies of his mercenaries and offered to narrate. Ku Yem was the mediator of the mercenary warriors, and he specified what class of mercenary was required. He continued that the gentleman at their place could find a fighter to meet his every need. When Ku Ok Kyung opened the money pouch, Ku Yum was puzzled and only mouthed "Hoo." After some time, he added that he was very generous despite his age. He offered to talk seriously about the case and told the celestial demon to take a seat. The young man who met him at the entrance brought him a cup of tea, which was very unusual for Ku Ok Kyung. Ku Yan called out to Childuk, who was already there, and said he had already brought everything. He took a scroll to see which mercenaries were currently available, then picked another scroll, saying it would fit. Unfolded this long list and offered to start choosing the right mercenary. He told me they had 3 outstanding mercenaries in their shop, and he would introduce each one, starting with the left scroll. So the first mercenary warrior with a sturdy build was offered for study. He graduated with honors from Heavenly Cloud Senior Academy and was the wind spirit of Huang Hong. He has defeated 8 dark orcs, 2 gargoyles, and a chimera. His main weapon is his fists. His words to his employer are that he will become a force for the one who lacks it. After some consideration, Ku Ok Kyung decided he wasn't a good fit and withdrew his candidacy. It was all foreign and incomprehensible to him, and then Ku Young said they were moving on to the next one. The first mercenary warrior was Lord Song Gong, who ranked first in the Senior Academy's Senior Flying Dragon graduation rankings. He destroys enemies with his dagger and has crushed 4 trolls, steel golems, and 2 wyverns. The special offer is a contract for only 320 nannies gold. He always says life is a real fight. Here, Ku Ok Kyung thought about it, but hasn't answered negatively yet, and Kyu Young then decided to show the third one at once. He destroyed countless gargoyles and slew a creepy black knight and a wyvern. His skills are so impeccable that he only needs to enter the dungeon once. Still, the fee for such abilities is high, 450 nannies for 15 days. Ku Ok Kyung muttered to himself that it was a dark swordsman from the demonic school. He asked about the demonic school. Cohen said that this organization was mighty a little over 100 years ago, and he was from there. But at this point, the demonic school could be considered just a martial group whose members have a very fiery temper. The heavenly demon asked if it was true. Cohen confirmed many rumors about the demonic school, but many were false. But one couldn't help but recognize that their cancellation skills were impressive, and Ku Ying had even heard that they had experience catching a high-ranking monster not listed in the Shanhai Jing. But no matter how riotous the members of the demonic school are, and some customers are looking for them, Ku Ok Kyung recognized how much the world has changed. Ku Yang continued that the prices for demon school males varied greatly, but he could guarantee the quality of their skills with certainty. The heavenly devil thought that if he hired someone, he should choose the best one and use him heavily. Then he chose, which fell on the third candidate from the demonic school. I'll cue again. The guy brought a cup of tea and asked me to wait for a while. He was left alone at the table with his thoughts and worries. He took a cup of tea and started drinking, while thinking about everything that had happened and the fact that he was drinking tea again. Although I was very hungry, I had to make do with only water, and then a warrior appeared. He approached quietly and unnoticed, but Ku Ok Kyung sensed his presence. The warrior then said that, before introducing himself, he wanted to announce the terms that each of them would have to adhere to. The dark swordsman said he only enters the dungeon once because he does not desire to waste his power in vain. He does not concern himself with the fact that the contract expires after 15 days, regardless of any situation that may occur. Ku Ok-kyung continued to drink his tea and listened while the Dark Swordsman continued that in return, he is ready to fulfill any request within 15 days, whether to find a person, an object, or similar requests. If there are any claims, the contract can be canceled right now. There is no compensation for breach of contract, and it was his mistake if he didn't read the details. But Ku Ok-kyung immediately said there was no annulment, and sharply threw the Dark Swordsman's bag of gold right into his hands before he could even think, and commented that the sack contained 500 gold pieces, 450 to the swordsman, and 50 to the stockbroker. The celestial demon clarified that the Dark Swordsman promised to fulfill any request in 15 days, and if this was true, the ME stood with a baggie and answered nothing, but Ku Ok-kyung decided to proceed. 5 days had passed since the heavenly demon hired the Dark Swordsman. The swordsman swung his knife with eagerness and anger and pounded the table to be heard everywhere. Ku Ok-kyung didn't realize the sounds and wondered who he was destroying. Maybe he had caught a dragon. But the Dark Swordsman reacted negatively to Ku Ok-kyung's teasing, who was laughing at him. Ku Ok-kyung joked that he wouldn't interfere with his work and asked if he could be quicker because he was very slow at his job. He said his poor stomach could rot like that and asked me to hurry up because he was very hungry. The Dark Swordsman became furious and said, "What other job? And what the hell is this job called?" He continued that since going to Kanho, he hasn't had a single failed mission and has been monster hunting. He was the protector at this time, but Ku Ok-kyung had finished his lunch that the Dark Swordsman had prepared for him and was about to leave. The Dark Swordsman thought he had successfully completed all these cruel and horrible missions. When the heavenly demon woke up, he slept very well and asked the mercenary for food. The Dark Swordsman was very angry at what he was doing all these 5 days, just cooking food that would go into the mouth of this idiot. He simply couldn't sully the name of the heavenly demon sacred school with such worthless nonsense, simply couldn't. But at the same time, he thought that it was not a good idea to give up such a large sum of money. If that asshole had not been his employer, he would have killed him 100 years ago. At this moment, the heavenly demon turned to the swordsman again and asked him if he had fallen asleep there. The swordsman talked himself into keeping a straight face. 500 nannies of gold was a chance that didn't come along every day to restore the heavenly demon sacred school. This opportunity should never be missed. He reassured himself that there were only 9 days left and he should get his head around something. Because even now, at this very moment, time is ticking relentlessly, and soon it will all be over. Night came, and the Dark Swordsman continued to cook dinner for the heavenly demon and do what he was punishing. After a while, the celestial demon ate well and fell back in his chair, leaving the dishes on the table. At this point, he thought he'd had a good meal and didn't even have the energy to move. He told the Dark Swordsman that he was giving him an A for tonight's dinner and thought it was good of him to hire him for himself. He added that he had also prepared for the remaining days. Still, the swordsman follower of the great heavenly demon sacred school thought he was doing some bullshit. The heavenly demon was just about to leave and said to stay out of the room until he called into the room. The swordsman turned to him and clarified when the real work would begin. The demon pondered and clarified the job work and what he could offer the swordsman. And then he remembered and couldn't understand how he could have forgotten. The swordsman was so happy that there would finally be a job as a mercenary. But it wasn't the job swordsman heavenly demon expected to see sent to wash his dishes. Frustrated, he was washing dishes and thought that time was running out even as he washed those stupid dishes. Night came and heavenly demon went to bed when the swordsman also finished his work and rested. The heavenly demon couldn't sleep. He meditated and practiced to restore his inner energy. When the meditation was over, he realized that this was the limit. If he continued, he would simply tear his energy pathways, but only now had he regained the energy that equaled 60 years. He had to stop there and find a way to make as much space for the inner energy as possible now. He wondered if he should try the demonic sky and precious clouds technique. Still, he realized if he couldn't catch the energy flow, he would simply lose consciousness and go to the other world. Then there could be demonic lightning. If lightning traveled through the body, the pathways for energy flows could be freed up. He thought that was the case, but it was just as likely that it could also move horses. Then there is only one solution left. Find and eat natural miracle pills, such as milk of purity or millennial snow ginseng. There's just one little problem. For the cost, you could build an entire city. And even if you had that kind of money, you wouldn't find the pills. He turned to Li Han to see if there was anything useful in his memories. He was sure at least one of these same monsters had Nadan. Nadan is an egg that appears in the body of animals and helps build up internal energy. Then the phrase threat level popped into his head. He immediately thought, what the hell else is this nonsense? After the incident that happened 140 years ago, from a place called the dungeon began to crawl out all sorts of monsters based on forces. People came up with a scale defined at the level of this force, and it became known as the threat level. Just as martial arts levels have a wall that can't be overcome, monster threat levels have the same limit. The highest threat level is 9. The heavenly demon realized that he needed to find the memories of some high threat level monster and started searching for them. In his memories, a monster appeared. Heavenly Demon thought that somehow this type looked sinister. He couldn't figure out who he was, but then he remembered that his name was Necromancer. When he looked closer at it, he realized it was also a bony head and looked just like that donkey. The boy has no memory of other high-threat monsters, but he needs to learn more about this Necromancer. He began to search the boy's memories for information, but the text was cut off in some places. So Li Han had been slacking off in his studies, or the memories had just been erased. He had no way out. He could look at what he had started looking at and saw the information that he could control the dead. He realized that the nucleus sustaining life in his body is the mana nucleus. The Necromancer uses this nucleus as the basis of black magic. He thought the living man had magic and believed the miracle pill would be found in this beast. The heavenly demon thought that no matter who he was, whether he was a lowly or immortal creature, if there was anything inside him, it would be Nadan. Then, critical information appeared in his memories, which concerned the Necromancer. This was the fourth to last monstrosity lesson he had wondered who the Necromancer was. The heavenly demon was very glad he would stop by the academy to meet that girl, but there was another reason to be there in the end. He decided that he was going to see that guy soon anyway, and that was enough. While digging through his memories, he wondered how strong this Necromancer was. He had a sleepless night of training ahead of him because he needed to temper Li Han's body as soon as possible. When morning came, the celestial demon turned to the dark swordsman and asked if his breakfast was ready. The swordsman figured that even without his whims, he would still serve him food for breakfast. In an instant, the dark swordsman had set the table with one hand, and everything looked very delicious and appetizing. He added that he had set a table of 16 dishes and excluded appetizers he did not like, so let him eat with pleasure. The heavenly demon had no reason to pick on the dark swordsman and had nothing to say. He simply remained silent. The sky demon clarified that there was no meat. The swordsman replied that unfortunately today, no ingredients came to his liking. The demon was not satisfied with such an argument, and he did not justify the lack of meat. And the dark swordsman was pleased to see that the heavenly demon had miscalculated this time. He thought he could catch him, but this dish wasn't on the table now. The sky demon didn't realize what the smell was, and the swordsman noticed that it had finally reached his employer. The swordsman said that the demon himself guessed that it was duck soup. It is cooked over a fire in a pot in the kitchen to soften the duck's skin, and strict adherence to the recipe and preparation is required. The demon was shocked and didn't think that in 5 days of hiring, there would be such progress. The swordsman remarked that he had never disappointed his hires yet. The heavenly demon couldn't believe that the swordsman had gotten wind of what food he wanted. He was looking forward to the swordsman's continued progress. The demon was ready to begin his meal, and the swordsman wished him good appetite. When he dined, he got some unusual herb, and he did not understand what it was. The swordsman said that he made a lucky choice, and if Demona wants more, let him be sure to tell him about it. The swordsman decided that he too should try one of the dishes and only reached for his chopsticks as suddenly something happened. The swordsman realized something was wrong and asked the celestial demon to stop his meal. He had become completely similar to the heavenly demon and wanted to eat the same lunch with him. The swordsman realized that being with this sloth, he had become the same without noticing that he had involved him so much that he had even taken over his mind. And then the swordsman became furious and asked, could this really have been the plan all along? He is the most prominent of the followers of the demonic school that was destroyed 100+ years ago and did for 5 days for 450 gold. He started to think back and realized that he hadn't done any meaningful work during that time. He was chowing down on food, wandering around the grocery store, and chowing down on food again. And then he had an idea that the celestial demon's plan was to get close to him otherwise. He was sure that his employer was a secret enemy scout, and it turned out that at the end of their contract, he would attack stealthily and destroy the swordsman. Suddenly, the heavenly demon turned to the dark swordsman, showed him the photo, and clarified whether he knew him. The swordsman did not expect such a question and answered nothing. The demon repeated his question and asked if he was deaf. The demon kept chewing and, in between meals, asked if he knew a type named necromancer. The swordsman asked if he meant the creature that summoned zombies and skeletons. The demon realized that the swordsman knew him. Then he asked him just one question, how strong this necromancer was. But swordsman thought the demon was only averting his gaze from his plan to play along, and he clarified why the demon was suddenly asking about him. He said if he was thinking of doing something stupid, he'd better hold his horses because a commoner like him would never be able to deal with a 9th-level threat monster. And when he added that to catch him, he would need quite a lot of time in preparation. The demon didn't understand why. And he said he was afraid the contract would expire before he could crush the necromancer. And now the demon was shocked. Why the hell would he catch him? The swordsman came into a stupor and didn't understand. He hired him exactly for this because this trap swordsman didn't expect such a question. The sky demon asked who would then cook the food if the swordsman went to catch monsters. The swordsman's face changed. He was so shocked he had nothing to say. Once again, I asked Demon about the food. He clarified that Demon had said exactly what he had said about the food. And at that very moment, there was an explosion. He was so angry. All he kept hearing was food, 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 food. The swordsman jumped up from his chair and hit the table with anger. At that moment, the table broke, and he scattered all the plates. The swordsman said he didn't want to hear about the fucking food anymore, and only sighed. The swordsman was shocked at what he had done. He had never been so aggressive. The demon turned to the swordsman in a calm tone. The swordsman asked how long the Lord had waited. He asked if the soup, boiled to perfection with soft duck meat, would be tasted. And he added that he'd forgotten that the soup comes with 3 servings of rice and 16 appetizers. The swordsman thought he'd managed to get his joint down, but the demon thanked him and said he'd appreciate it after he tried it. He knew the demon was obsessed with food. The swordsman must never let his guard down so as not to arouse any suspicion. He must bring food as soon as possible. He said that it was just a second and everything would be fine. The heavenly demon did not understand what suddenly happened to him. Although he had duck soup, he was always happy because he remembered something. The swordsman needed to fill out these papers, but the demon couldn't figure out what it meant to frame a face. Demon thought about what it meant to draw and didn't understand why everything was so painful and why so many things were needed for admission. The next day, the heavenly demon arrived at the Heaven Warrior Academy to submit his documents. He went into the building, went upstairs, walked over to the administration department, and went inside. The head of the administration department was Ku Yun-cheon. He took the documents and read them. This was the profile of a dark swordsman of the Heavenly Demon Sacred School. He was a mercenary. The head of the department couldn't believe it was true that it was a student from the demonic school. Still, the assistant assured them that they had checked everything several times. The supervisor clarified whether he had said anything else. He did not make any demands, but the deputy supervisor replied that he did not know. He just handed over the application for membership and walked to the counseling office. Just by looking at his work experience, it was clear that he was a head above the rest of the academy students. The supervisor couldn't believe that he had managed to capture a dark knight of the 7th threat level. Lee Jung-gu noticed that the dark swordsman had captured an inferior knight who did not have a skeleton horse. Moreover, the dark swordsman was in the company of talented warriors, which is why he was lucky enough to destroy the dark knight. The leader said that no matter what, a dark knight is a dark knight, and even the 4th-year students in their academy wouldn't be able to suppress him. He clarified what the instructors were saying, and the deputy responded that one more vote was in favor. The supervisor did not understand. For this reason, the deputy responded that he was facing a bloody threat, so it was decided to grade the apprentices according to their favorability to the academy. Lee Jung-gu added that no matter how you look at it, this organization is a demonic school, and Dark Swordsman is the first to join them. Ko Yun-cheon clarified. Even though the alliance with the Sa clan, the deputy confirmed that yes. It was an agreement between the Chan and Sa clans to conclude such a treaty, which was facilitated by a girl named Lig Weezer. The condition of the agreement was one to fight on the same front line against the monsters. Immediately after that, each of the parties to the treaty received magical power from Lig Weezer. Rallying the power of each other, academies were founded, and Zhongyuan stopped receiving damage from monsters. It should not be forgotten that the period of enmity between the clans was much longer than the period of their union, and they asked what the deputy thought about it. Lee Jun-gu wanted to be accepted into their academy, so the head of the department asked for a reason. He replied that a dark swordsman couldn't become another academy student. The supervisor decided he would take him on as a pupil from today and wanted to see him immediately. The deputy had something else to tell him. He said the dark swordsman had not come alone but with his guardian. The supervisor didn't understand which trustee and asked if he was also from the demonic school, and the deputy said no. At this moment, the heavenly demon was doing push-ups, pretending to sigh heavily from the exercise. The deputy told the supervisor that he was a repeat student. The dark swordsman didn't understand what the heavenly demon was doing and why he was doing push-ups and 12 times so tired. Lee Jun-gu said that when the dark swordsman's guardian was studying at their academy in the second year, the leader was shocked. The 6th day of hiring was an early, warm morning when the celestial demon woke up in his room. He was getting ready for the academy and trying on his uniform when the dark swordsman walked in. Demon said it looked much more rustic than he expected, and at this time, swordsman just stood back. A little later, he noticed that his dear employer had asked him to buy such a uniform and asked why he needed it. Heavenly Demon replied that everything was clear. To go to the academy, you need to wear a uniform. The swordsman asked what academy we were talking about. He couldn't understand what the Heavenly Demon needed it for, and asked him straight in the forehead why he needed to go there. The Sky Demon very cheerfully replied that something was interesting there. The swordsman said he didn't answer normally, and at that moment, the second form of the academy flew into his hands. The dark swordsman was puzzled about what he needed this academy form and what it meant. He certainly had thoughts about it, but he really hoped they weren't what he was thinking. But the Heavenly Demon confirmed his fears and said that this was it, and he was going with him for company. The dark swordsman exploded and asked why he should go there on Earth, but the Sky Demon said he didn't have to if he didn't want to go. He added that his biography would soon be challenging to display in the mercenary shop. The dark swordsman was simply furious and couldn't believe he was hearing this with his own ears. The Sky Demon told him that if anything went wrong, he could get his gold back and told him to think hard. In the meantime, he went to the academy. The dark swordsman had no choice but to go to the academy with him and was very angry. He began to put on his uniform and thought that he needed this money to rebuild the great heavenly demon's sacred school. He was sure that Demon should keep the thought well in his head, and that's when the clock ticked. To calm down, the dark swordsman counted in his head and had already reached 207,359. He has calculated everything. In 15 minutes, he exhales 240 times, and in 2 hours, he will get about 1,920 times. For the remaining 9 days, just this number. The swordsman thought it was better to spend the last days of the contract wasting no energy and just hold tight to his money. At this time, the heavenly demon had finished his training and decided to call it a day. He clarified how he looked because he was so damn cool. The swordsman decided that even if he was kicked out of the mercenary shop, he would bury this cretin at this moment when he came to the deputy department. He walked in and introduced himself as Lee Jun-gun. He apologized that they must have been waiting for him and wanted to get right to the interview. At this very moment, the heavenly demon was showing his elastic muscles to the swordsman, who was angry and thought that he would tear him to pieces after the contract. The deputy stood in the doorway in utter confusion, wondering which one was the dark swordsman. He hoped someone bragged about his muscles and wouldn't be a dark swordsman. And then he looked at the guy who was sitting all pissed off on the bench and realized that the dark swordsman was him. The deputy turned to the dark swordsman and asked if it was him, to which the latter rudely replied that it was. The deputy showed him the application and said that he had applied to join Heavenly Warrior Academy. He was determined to enter the 4th year of the 4th grade. The swordsman tried to calm himself down as best he could when the heavenly demon kept joking about him and saying he was a quadriplegic and 2 grades higher than he was. And then the swordsman laughed that if he was quieter than water and lower than grass, the mercenary's property would become his, which would be the real death blow. The deputy called the swordsman to the 4th class, and the mercenary said that once the 4th class was over, they would meet at the academy's gate. But suddenly, Deputy Lee Jun-gu stopped asking questions and asked to wait for the swordsman to answer him. The Sky Demon clarified where the 3rd grade sophomore class is for the deputy. At this point, the deputy thought he had a very respectful form of speech, or a slightly less respectful style. He said that if he were his instructor, he would lower his grades for behavior. He is a student and should follow the rules of etiquette, at least those of adults. At first, the heavenly demon was shocked by what the deputy told him. Then he laughed out loud enough to make tears run down his eyes. The deputy replied that the third-grade sophomore class was in the next building on the 7th floor of the demon. The deputy thanked and apologized for the impolite treatment. He laughed, said he'd see you again, and went. The swordsman said he was naturally a lunatic and asked him to take him to class. At this moment, the heavenly demon laughed and remembered that he was a disciple, so he was addressed like this. He walked and thought it was all pointless. He had only changed his body, but everything around him was different now. He thought that he would have considered this situation absurd 140 years ago. He just didn't need to go to any academy then. He needed to attend classes to get used to his new body, and he just couldn't quit now that he was discovering many new things. The neighboring building looked very good, and Heavenly Demon was glad that it wasn't destroyed as the main headquarters of the demonic school. He had to go up to the 7th floor and joyfully went to his classroom. At this point, the teacher stood in the classroom and asked the students how they had been doing all this time. First, he congratulated everyone on finishing their freshman year and moving on to sophomore year. He saw the new faces in the class, so he decided to introduce himself. His name is Cho Joksang, a weapons instructor. His lessons will be boring, but in practice, you can't do without them. So you had to listen carefully. That was the end of his introduction, and he moved on to the rosters since today was the first day of school. Someone suddenly burst through the door as he began to voice the list. The students were shocked. They couldn't understand what had happened. Someone had taken the door out, and everyone saw someone's foot. The instructor did not understand the matter. The heavenly demon stormed into the classroom and clarified whether it was the 3rd class of the 2nd year. The instructor was furious and asked who the hell he was for kicking the door to the classroom out of the blue. The instructor was shocked by the insolence of the celestial demon. He asked what this nonsense was, and then the celestial demon, already in a more respectful form, apologized and introduced himself again. He repeated that he was he and addressed him as the grim redhead. The instructor's fury was unprecedented, and he didn't even have anything to say. The heavenly demon clarified whether it was enough and decided to go sit back down. Cho Joksang did not allow him to enter the classroom and told the deputy that this guy was crazy, to which the deputy replied and asked him to go out into the hallway for a moment. The demon did not listen to anyone and went on. He did not understand why such a small table existed and clarified whether he would now be taught lessons. Cho Joksang could not understand what kindergarten was. Kuokaken arrogantly walked to his seat, walked over to the table, pulled back a chair, and sat down. The instructor and students alike were shocked, and he made himself at home at the desk. Behind him sat one of the students who really didn't like the celestial demon's behavior and couldn't deal with him right now. He thought the guy was a freak because he was acting like that. He thought it was only the first day of the semester, and he was already acting like that. His name is Mu Ren, and a voice was heard at the next desk asking what he would do now. Mu Ren that he is not fucked up and to leave him alone. Of course, he already had a plan. The classmate offered to give a verbal lesson now, but he had a different plan of action. He wanted to deal with him because teachers couldn't see. He replied that the teachers were nearby, so they would sit quietly for the time being. The girl asked him if he would drag him to the roof, to which he replied that of course, and there was no better place to practice. Mu Ren sat there thinking about how he should beat up the bastard today and thought it would be a fun year. But the heavenly demon was sitting as if nothing had happened. The teacher and the deputy were discussing this boy. I couldn't understand how such an impudent person managed to. The deputy replied that he had no idea but had brought a dark swordsman, which was the truth. And the most important thing is that the head of the administration department has ordered all eyes and ears on this boy. We should have tried to make sure he followed the rules, and if anything happened, by all means, report immediately. The deputy apologized for interrupting and offered to continue the lesson. He was shocked that the guy had even knocked on the door. The instructor replied that they would fix it quickly. The heavenly demon studied the disciples and considered that the disciples sitting there were members of different families. Not far away sat a guy and a girl. He thought they were from the same guy, who warned that this jerk was looking at the girl, but she didn't care. He even saw Shaolin Temple disciples in the class and was very shocked. It was surprising to him how many clans and families had gathered in one place. He knew something from Li Han's memories, but it was still interesting. Although there used to be types who didn't care where you were from, I wonder if they're still alive. That's who would have liked this era. Someone approached him and asked if he was okay. Kuokaken didn't realize who it was, and the guy was shocked that he didn't recognize him. He replied that he was his friend. Seojin said he was strange today and asked if it was the Li Han he knew. He asked if he had any pain, and the heavenly demon realized that this guy was Seo-jin and thought he should play along for a quiet life at the academy. Ku-ok-ken said he was fine and that they didn't say hello to him on swords this time. Seo-jin kahal, he didn't look like himself. The sky demon asked how he should behave, and his friend did not know how to answer. The instructor interrupted their dialogue. He addressed him by the name Lee Han. The heavenly demon responded but did not know what would happen next or how to behave. The instructor told him to enter the office next time by opening the door instead of kicking it open because fixing it every time is problematic. Ku-ok-ken was confused and didn't know what to say, so he asked his friend. The friend said that it's clear that you should apologize and say that you won't do it again. The guy said it was uncomfortable, but he thought he should beat the head of the person who had put the door open. The teacher said he should apologize and asked him who apologized. The guy sat in half-turn. The instructor instructed Lee Han to address teachers respectfully and added that he didn't know what his family had taught him. The guy thought that he had not addressed anyone like you for a long time, but this experience would also be interesting, and he agreed with the instructor. The instructor decided to start the lesson and told everyone to open the 9th page of the textbook. Heavenly Demon didn't have a textbook, so a friend offered to take one. The teacher continued and reminded them not to forget that there are endless ways to use the sword in practice. Then they said that they would take apart this part and finish it. Chol, from the word for break, and shik, from the word for method, is a technique for blocking an opponent's attack. Cholshik is divided into 3 types. The teacher asked who could tell us about them. Somun-en, one of the 7 Somuns, raised his hand and asked permission to answer. But suddenly there were some sounds. Somun-en turned to the side. I couldn't believe my eyes. Where were those sounds coming from? What did they mean? His gaze drifted to the neighboring desk, and he saw that Lee Han was asleep and snoring. Lee Han's friend was very frightened and surprised. He addressed him by name, but he did not answer as he was sound asleep. For example, Somun-en asked if he wanted to stand up, but the heavenly demon was ready to die from this pressure. The instructor then became enraged, shouting at the whole class and addressing him by name. Ku-ok-ken somehow got up from his desk and clarified what they wanted from him. The instructor said that this young man seemed to know everything and asked what his behavior was in class. He ordered him to tell him the 3 types of chalk, and if he got the answer wrong. He thought he didn't like the kid immediately. He didn't even bat an eye, ruining school property. The instructor didn't give a damn about the orders of his supervisor and was furious that at the first class of the new semester, Lee Han was snoring like a locomotive. All the students were only happy that Lee Han was really hurt. One thought he was dead, and the other called him a dumbass. Lee Han's friend was shocked and told him to at least answer something that couldn't be punished in the semester's first class. Heavenly Demon. He didn't wake up yet and didn't understand what he was talking about. What 3 kinds of what the hell he didn't understand? His friend thought he would get a big bang for his buck. His friend decided to save him and said he would answer it instead. Still, the heavenly demon noted that the question itself was already wrong. The instructor was puzzled and asked what this disciple Lee Han meant. He began to answer that the part chal contains 2 meanings, namely tearing and cutting with a sword. Analyzing the word in this way, there are 5 kinds in all. First, chakshik. This type allows you to overpower the opponent's blade. Second, chakshik, through a penetrating attack, helps block the enemy's attack. Third, sugamshik means taking the attack and the ball with a fist or palm. With this answer, he amazed the whole class. Even his friend was surprised at what he knew. He said the 4th finger shiker is the 4th finger pressing on the ground to deprive the opponent of breath. The last 5th is the dancer, with which you can cut the opponent's sword in half. And he said that's why there are 5 species, not 3, and he thought his answer was correct enough. At that moment, he looked at the whole class and asked what was wrong with them all. He said something was wrong, and they all sat there with their mouths open. The instructor was also shocked and asked how he knew all this because the last 2 types of sure eats were not studied in the 2nd year. The sky demon said he was just answering the question I asked. Was the answer wrong? The teacher said that everything was correct. He replied that he agreed with him that palshchik and donchchik are unspeakably useful in battle techniques. They added that their weapons class consists only of theory and fundamental combat skills, which will be taught in the 4th year. And then the bell rang. The instructor, with a disgruntled face, said the class was over. He walked out of the classroom, and the students began to gather their things and leave the room after him. The Sky Demon said that he would have listened if it was a real lesson. But as it was, he almost died of boredom. His friend was shocked when he found out about it. The Sky Demon didn't understand what exactly he was talking about, but then added that it was the easiest thing to do. He suggested finishing the tedious talk and going to the academy to watch. A friend didn't understand what it meant to watch the academy, but Ku-Ok Ken stuck it out and said they would watch the building around the neighborhood and just walk around. Mu-Ren was stunned and decided that the Cretan had lost his mind, so he changed his plans and decided to smash him into the wall. Seo-Jin said they didn't have time to go out because nothing was left for the next class. At that time, Mu-Ren flew up to Ku-Ok, pushed Seo-Jin away, and told that bespectacled guy to get lost. Seo-Jin fell from that Grimilla's push and didn't even realize what had happened, as Mu-Ren had already run up to Li Han. Mu-Ren was so angry and flew up to the heavenly demon so quickly that he didn't expect it. He screamed for the Cretan to die, and with all his might, he wanted to pound his fist into his head and hit him right in the back of the head. But suddenly, someone abruptly turned around and grabbed Mu-Ren's hand with such force that his hand turned red. Then the same unknown person tripped Mu-Ren's foot. Mu-Ren's foot went off, and he flew to the floor with a thud. Mu-Ren didn't expect such a turn. He was frightened because he wasn't ready for such a fall. The heavenly demon in Li Han's body stood calmly and looked at everything that was going on, and someone from the class helped to knock out the insolent classmate. His defender was a guy from their class who had killed Mu-Ren with one punch. All who saw this technique were shocked. One of them even spilled milk from the bottle. Another stood with his mouth open and could not believe his eyes. Li Han's friend was so shocked that Baek Mu-Ren could knock out this guy with one hand. Mahina Pek got even angrier when he stood up again from another blow and asked who the hell he was. He wanted to deal with him and started throwing his kicks, but his strength was not enough against his classmates. Then, this warrior's eyes turned white with anger, and he began to defend himself. He used his technique and struck the next blow. Mu-Ren only had time to defend himself, so he crossed his arms over his chest so that the blow wouldn't feel so strong. The fighter used his energy punch, which destroyed everything in its path. It was so strong that no one could deal with it. Mu-Ren's strength was already waning, so he endured the energy flow and forced himself up with his last strength. When he got up, he asked why he was getting into their fight since they had been on good terms. The defender was someone N, who said that Mu-Ren was already a sophomore, but still had not regained his brain, and asked if he was ashamed that he had attacked from the back. And he said he thought he was the only one in this class who would just stand idly by and watch the gratuitous violence. He suggested he have an official fight in front of the academy since he was so eager to fight. He added that if he didn't care who the opponent would be, he was ready to fight, and once again, he asked him if he agreed. Mu-Ren ordered him to speak only words he could answer, and asked him again if he was confident. These words hurt Somanen, but he was ready to fight him to the last drop, and would proceed immediately. Mu-Ren suggested not wasting time and said that the outcome is evident if you don't fight. At this time, his friend flew up to Li Han and asked if he was okay. Mu-Ren warned Somanen that if he didn't want to get into trouble, he should stop poking his nosy nose into other people's business. At this time, Odnoklasniki says that even the interest is gone and that this topic is closed, as it is infuriating when beetles stick all sorts of things. The heavenly demon asked his friend who the type was, to which he replied that it was the one who ranked second in the first-year rankings. It was one of the 5 geniuses. Ku-Ok Ken said that this lesson bored them, and they decided to punch each other in the face. He didn't understand who came up with the idea of giving theoretical lessons. The heavenly demon asked what their next lesson was. Jin replied that ethics, and he heard that they would be taught about mutual aid. This upset the heavenly demon, and he asked them what they would be taught about the spirit of chivalry. He was so upset that he was about to leave, but Seo-Jin stopped him because the class bell was about to ring. Suddenly, someone grabbed Li Han by the shoulder and asked him to wait. He was stunned and did not realize who it could be. It was someone young. He asked if he was taught to say thank you. He didn't ask for a greeting with all the formalities, but wanted to warn you about something. Thanks to donations, he said he has no prejudice against students who enter the academy. Still, his ill-manneredness in the classroom has no limit, and continued that the Cholshik can be divided into 5 types. But this was part of the vast knowledge not included in the lesson material. It requires many large-scale actions, so it is studied in the practical session. It also requires a good weapon and powerful internal energy. And finish that next time. For starters, let him learn about the purpose and lesson plan. Also, he needs to learn to control his fatigue because it is the foundation of the basics for a warrior. I recommended that he sleep at home. The heavenly demon listened silently, but was so shocked that he had nothing to say that his eyes were already boiling with anger. Seojin realized that something strange was happening between them, and that a conflict was about to break out, so he separated them. Seojin said that Lee-han understood and offered to end it all. Still, suddenly, the classmates backed up So-moon-yoon and noted that the guy had already made a fuss in the first lesson. Because of his snoring, Jin couldn't concentrate at all. There was not a single mistake in So-moon-yoon's words, but Jin couldn't understand why the situation was getting worse and worse. Everyone gave him a standing ovation and said what was expected from the Sword family's talent, and what a badass their So-moon-en was. And in Lee-han flew stones, all saying that he interferes with listening to the lesson and his face is too brazen. He thinks that he made a donation to the academy and now became the Pope of the Earth. So-moon-en asked for an answer and wanted to hear something back from Lee-han because the other students agreed. Suddenly their dialogue was interrupted by a girl who said they are undoubtedly good at communicating. But is it possible to flutter tongues in another place? The heavenly demon realized that it was the same girl. Her name was Unso-ren. She said there was no point in dwelling on the problem for so long, and the second lesson started 7 minutes ago. So-moon-en saw her eyes and couldn't help himself. He was numbed by her beauty and a blush appeared on his cheeks. She asked him what he was staring at and if he wanted to make way for her. How could I squeeze out a few words that, of course. They were just finishing their conversation and ready to leave. So-moon-young said he had nothing against it. He just wanted him to behave normally. The next time, all the students separated. Seo-jin was apprehensive about his friend and asked how he was doing and how it was good that it didn't come to a scandal. The sky demon was very upset and turned to his friend. He asked if he had seen the... Did he see the guy touch his shoulder? We lectured him, and he turned to his friend and scared him with his face. The sky demon couldn't believe that someone had put a hand on his shoulder and thought it was a very funny fact. He had never felt such a thing before. He laughed and said that it was a wonderful world and that he would never have had this before his friend asked him if he was okay. He suggested that So-jin try to do the same thing, but his friend didn't understand what he was talking about. He told his friend to put his stump on his shoulder. It was hilarious, and he started laughing even harder than he had shocked So-jin. My friend didn't know what was happening to him or what wall he hit on vacation. The school building looked very beautiful. It was tall, with carved windows and beautiful facades, and enclosed by a small fence. The head of administration stood looking out the window at the view from the top floor of their school. At that moment, someone knocked and asked if the manager was in the office, and he allowed him to enter. The supervisor asked how things were going, to which the deputy replied that the student from the demonic school was really something. He would be shocked when he saw everything with his own eyes. The supervisor asked who else was in the 4th grade 4th period class, and was told that Yang Da-chan and Nam Gung-ho were only 3. He was shocked that Nam Gung-ho was in 4th grade and asked if it was true again. The deputy said that Yang Dae and Chang Woo were strong fighters, but they were still not up to Nam Gung-ho. Perhaps if the Dark Swordsman and Nam Gung-ho dueled, the outcome of the fight would be unpredictable, the leader agreed. The manager warned him to avoid bad days and asked him if he understood what he was implying. He was told that physical education instructor Nue Cheon-baek was closely supervising it. Perhaps it's because of the Dark Swordsman. Even though it was sometimes difficult for the instructor to get his butt off the chair, he could not restrain his curiosity. Although it's logical that soon, the Dark Swordsman and Nam Gung-ho will have everyone's attention, the supervisor let the deputy go and said that once the fight between these two ends, you must let him know who wins. The leader turned again to the window and thought about the fight between these two. He could not have predicted the exodus. I thought that time was flying quickly, and it was time to submit the paperwork for approval. At this moment, that very battle was taking place in the Heaven Warrior Academy's training arena. The Dark Swordsman and Nam Gung-ho were fighting, and both were already running out of strength, but neither was ready to give up. Due to the strength and power of both fighters, the arena was already smoking, and fire fell from the ruins. Herr Namgung was a powerful opponent. He knew what to do and how to behave. There were many spectators in the arena, and everyone was cheering for their favorite fighter. The fight was held on swords and with the help of magic. They mostly cheered for Nam Gung-ho, and shouted that he was also good. They asked him to grind him into powder. A medical instructor, Chog, monitored the battle and the fighter's condition. Finally, someone approached her and clarified how everything was progressing. It was the deputy. She was very happy that he had finally arrived, and he replied that he had dropped in briefly to see the head of the administration department. He noted that even the instructors that you don't see in normal times had gathered, and no matter how you look at it, it was all because of today's battle. The duel came out to see everyone, even the instructors, who now had a lesson. They handed over their duties to the deputies. We came out to see so much of ourselves attracted to this duel. The gym instructor thought everyone, even the lazy old man who had shown up here, had come. Chog and Yen talked to the deputy and said that the battle had lasted 15 minutes at first. As expected, there were only 2 of them left. At that moment, the Dark Swordsman did something that had only been rumored, and the deputy was shocked. The Dark Swordsman used demonic energy, and the mere sight of such energy made his throat constrict. Their fight was so exciting and interesting that the Dark Swordsman got caught up in the excitement and looked for every possible way to win. The word was left for Namgung Ho, and everyone waited to see how he would respond to this energy. Namgung Ho took out his fire sword, which had endless strength and power, and pointed it towards the Dark Swordsman. The deputy couldn't understand since it was Flame Chog, and Yen had heard that Namgung Ho had gotten the sword. This was a big shock to the deputy. He didn't know that he had gotten the sword and from whom exactly too. She queried that even he was aware of it. A few months ago, the Namgong family led a raid on a dungeon in Anhui province that was blazing with fire. The commander-in-chief at that time was the head of Namgung Ju, who was Namgung Ho's father. The dungeon master fire giant Cert was eventually suppressed. Still, head Namgung could not stay alive after being so seriously wounded. Before his death, he handed the sword to the young heir, Namgun Ho, this sacred weapon of the sword sort. When the Dark Swordsman saw this weapon, he didn't think he could see such a thing here, and said he was lucky to have a valuable sword. Namgung Ho said that it was indeed a very valuable sword and a family relic. He had only recently picked it up, so he was not yet fluent in it. He added that since his opponent was a Dark Swordsman, it was an honor for a swordsman to hear such words without a sword of this level. He said it was good that he recognized him as his rival, but did he really think he could crush him with that blade? In Namgung Ho's mind, he thought that he should attack first before the swordsman did this time. In turn, he knew if he used fire energy, he would freeze her with ice energy. Another event came with the emergence of the dungeon, shoes giving the wearer speed. It was also armor that healed puncture wounds and helped fighters in battle. Flame-emitting sword and the like by event is meant the discovery of unusual items of sacred weapons for destroying monsters. But monster hunting has shown that not all sacred weapons are equally powerful. The bigger the scale of the dungeon, the stronger the enemy, and the more powerful weapons you get. However, if a warrior's abilities are insufficient, it will be impossible to even hold a weapon. All these thoughts flashed through Namgung Ho's mind before he wanted to strike with his fire sword. Dark Swordsman said that he would be the first to attack this time and charged his ice crystal, and used the small hand's demonic attack, which covered the entire arena with thick ice, and all the fire there was extinguished. Namgung Ho didn't expect that he would be the one who wanted to make the first fire strike, and he was at a loss as to what to do next. He couldn't even move his leg, and the Dark Swordsman checked with him to see if the ice had bound his leg. Namgung Ho could not understand how such a thing was possible or why he could maintain ice energy even despite the flames. Chog and Ying couldn't believe the Dark Swordsman didn't react to fire and calmly froze the ground. They couldn't understand how such a technique existed. Namgung Ho could not get out of the ice and realized that at this rate, he would soon be immobilized. So to get out, he decided to settle down and start again blow by blow. For the first time in a long time, Dark Swordsman met an opponent who was fun to fight with, and he thought it would be unseemly not to show him his true abilities. And with a threatening look at his opponent, he told him to remember that he would not be spared. He added that he should not dare to relax and flew toward him to meet him in his fire. The swordsman struck with his ice sword with all the strength he had right now. Namgung Ho defended himself as much as possible with the fire sword and endured this fight with dignity. Their swords merged, and there was a real explosion in the arena, shattering the floor beneath their feet. At this moment, the Heavenly Demon was attending an ethics class. The instructor told everyone to take their seats. They went on to say that today, they will study the concept of mutual aid. First, we need to check attendance. All the seats were occupied except one. This seat belonged to Li Han, and the instructor didn't understand why it was empty. She turned to Li Khan's friend, who was sitting next to her, and asked where his neighbor had gone. Jin replied that Li Khan had told her that his stomach was not all right, so he had gone to the health center. Jin remembered their conversation, and Han didn't want to listen to a useless lecture about mutual aid. He said that he would go out, and the teacher about going out got right to the point. The desk mate turned to the co-genie and told him he was four-eyed and lying, wasn't he? He said he went to the nurse's station to get some medicine. On his way back, he didn't meet any Khan. He asked Jin if he knew where that guy had gone. But Jin remained silent, and the guy repeated his question about why he ignored him to Mu Ren. This was the only nice thing he had heard all day. Mu Ren remembered that he had just the thing to do with that asshole. Now he wouldn't have to bother looking for it. It would be twice as much fun. They turned to the Kojin and told him to take them to their friend, or they would kill him if he ran away. At this very moment, on the roof of the main building of the Heaven Warrior Academy, a heavenly demon was lying on the roof and resting. He wanted to sleep and yawned constantly. The study had exhausted him all day. He thought the weather was 5 points. He couldn't understand why he was always sleepy. Maybe it was because he was in a child's body. He lay down and thought about what other chivalrous spirits, such as children small by God, were going to be told at the lecture times now. He decided to forget about it, jumped up, and thought again about his inner energy and how to raise it. His internal energy no longer builds up, and he was only able to increase it by a captcha and a half. He thought he had only used the reverse blood circulation technique in vain. If he had known it would be like this, he would have done any other breathing exercise. The heavenly demon had almost reached the level of a sacred demon in his past life. Still, he realized that a few necessary conditions were present to comprehend his current body, at least the level of an escaped demon. He argued that consciousness is one of the first conditions for realizing what takes a lot of time. Man reaches a certain level of mastery of martial arts differently. Therefore, it is necessary to find the optimal way of consciousness. He concluded that since he was now in Li Khan's body, it was impossible to raise his level using the past method of realization. He thought further that the second condition is the internal energy of the body, and to accumulate internal energy one needs patience, time, and endless training. Now his internal energy is equal to 3 captions if he continues the usual breathing exercises. To move to the next level, he will need less and measure a year. He knew that to reach the level of an escaped demon, the required amount of internal energy was more than 7 captcha, and the whole thing would take 2.5 years. Then a brilliant idea came into his head. You could cut down on the time, and it would be easy to do so. Did Khan's bony head appear in the memories heavenly demon knew? Apart from this type, there are no other options. But he still didn't know how to find him or how to get his Nadan. He only had to take a deep breath. He hoped with all his heart that the necromancer would be a big shot and he could get his hands on Nadan. Not far from the roof was the arena, and there the battle continued. The dark swordsman continued to use her ice power. The heavenly demon in Li Khan's body heard some incomprehensible sounds, like a fight, and he could not understand where they were coming from. Nam Gung Ho tried to confront the dark swordsman equally. From his last strength, he defended himself with his sword and fought back very strongly. The heavenly demon realized it was demonic energy from his mercenary. He thought a guy was giving right after entering all the fights and battles. He decided to go and see what was going on there, but from the roof, he could see ice and fireballs flying. The dark swordsman was very happy to fight such an opponent and struck blow after blow with more force. Their fight went on for a long time. It was a very mesmerizing show for the audience. Nam Gung Ho thought he couldn't even find a moment to attack, and the swordsman kept attacking him. He decided that letting him use this technique was a mistake, and considered him a very difficult opponent. Nam Gung Ho's legs were chained to the earth, and only had enough strength to repel attacks. He realized he had to find a way out immediately or he would lose this fight. His shackled legs were causing many problems and his strut was terrible from the recoil. The dark swordsman was in an advantageous position when applying this technique. He was open to any attack from his side. He repeated that he was clear about whether he could crush him with his sword. The swordsman was confident that he would win this fight as his abilities surpassed Nam Gung Ho's. Nam Gung Ho couldn't do anything about it. He knew beforehand that he would lose this fight and was very upset about it. With anger, he clenched his teeth, which betrayed more inner energy that would help him take out this insolent dark swordsman. Chug and N Avenger watched from the podium, and what happened the next moment struck them dead. Not only they, but all the spectators present in the arena held their breath and opened their mouths in amazement. The physical education instructor, watching from his office, was also very worried and did not expect such a turn of events. At this moment, the dark swordsman's sword melted in his hands. He couldn't understand how such a thing was possible. He was shocked and only thought that the steel blade had broken into 2 pieces like wood. When the swordsman's sword first met flame, it was dark flame, and he clarified his blade's ability. Namgung Ho said, "Yes, this ability is his sword, and it can be used to release the strongest fire." Namgung Ho offered to decide the victory with a last strike since the dark swordsman's sword had broken. The swordsman specified exactly what kind of last blow, which was funny for him to hear. He thought it had been a long time since he had such a strong fighting spirit awakened in him like this, and he couldn't remember the last time his heart had beaten as frantically as it did now. The swordsman asked if it was true that his name was Namgung Ho, and said that he had heard that the Namgung family was considered the ruler of Anhui province. He realized that the rumors were not false. He had almost forgotten what a mum was and thanked his opponent for reminding him. He added that he was sorry he wouldn't be able to have any more fun, and suggested that we ended already. The dark swordsman recovered his sword and continued the fight using ice, while Namgung Ho fought with his fire sword. The two elements stood against each other with such a powerful force. This battle was very mesmerizing. Once again, fire and ice met, and their impact sent shards of ice flying in different directions. The intertwined ice and fire burst high into the sky, crushing everything in its path. At that moment, the dark swordsman injured his arm again, and the impact was felt by everyone, even the spectators in the stands. Everything around was filled with smoke from the impact. Nothing could be seen, only black shadows flickering. The dark swordsman couldn't believe he could repel such an attack, but Namgung Ho withstood it with dignity. The dark swordsman was amazed and very upset by this. He sat down on the ground and closed his eyes. Namgung Ho asked him what he would do if he was going to bat next. The dark swordsman replied that he thought enough and barely admitted defeat to himself. Namgung Ho admitted that, if we were to be honest, they were tied because he managed to surpass the dark swordsman not with his skills, but with the help of the sacred weapon. The swordsman said that it cannot be called an excuse. What is recognized must be recognized, since good weapons are also part of the skills. Tired but satisfied rivals stood with their backs to each other. It was indeed a battle of equals. The dark swordsman was about to leave, but decided to clarify just one detail. He cautiously asked Namgung Ho what the name of his invincible sword was. He replied that it is the sword of Surt, sacred, and has unique powers. The dark swordsman left, noting that this fight had been an excellent experience for him, and marked the name of this sword for himself. Coming out of the door that led into the arena, the dark swordsman saw a celestial demon who was very happy to see him. He said, "There you are, mercenary." The swordsman was surprised and asked what he had forgotten here, to which the heavenly demon replied that he had been exploring the neighborhood and had come here. His employer praised him and said that the fight was excellent. He didn't expect the dark swordsman to be a good fighter. The swordsman was angry at everything his employer said and thought he was an underdog. He thought that the heavenly demon would talk nonsense again, so he just ignored him. Kuoke Ken didn't want to keep up with the dark swordsman and decided to ask him about the technique he used on the battlefield. He decided that it was a demonic attack of the small hand and clarified really so it was. The swordsman came in astonishment and couldn't understand how this fool knew about this technique. He turned to his employer and cautiously clarified how he knew this. But the heavenly demon didn't say anything, but smiled back and continued to stand motionless near the wall. The swordsman said he wasn't even from the demonic school and couldn't understand how he knew about this technique. It's an ancient technique called the demonic small hand attack, but it's not well known to many people. One of the secret techniques that brought glory to the demonic school was a technique that allowed you to freeze your opponent by summoning cold energy once the demonic small arm attack had been made. This technique was used to destroy the most dangerous monsters. It froze it completely and killed it on the spot. However, 140 years ago, the Heavenly Demon's sacred school was completely destroyed, and most of the secret techniques ceased. Therefore, at present, demonic attacks are unknown to the people of Kanko. The Dark Swordsman couldn't understand how any employer knew about this, and the instructors and assistants conducting the pie fight couldn't recognize his technique. After a bit of thought, the Sky Demon exhaled and answered him. He asked how he knew that, and jokingly replied that he'd heard somewhere by accident Swordsman thought he was a real badass. He continued that it didn't matter at all now, because the mercenary, whom he had found with difficulty and invested all his fortune in, had just been tortured like a punching bag. The swordsman was angry and said that nobody had tortured him. He replied that he didn't want to fight with all his strength on the Pima, but the Heavenly Demon didn't believe it. The Dark Swordsman was more interested in other things and decided to skip this topic about the fight. He didn't calm down and continued to interrogate how he knew about the demonic attack of the small hand. The heavenly demon froze and raised the index finger of his left hand upwards. The dark swordsman was dumbfounded and didn't understand what else it meant. Still, the heavenly demon continued and suggested that he do so. He offered to extend his contract for the story for another month. The swordsman thought he was out of his mind and didn't agree. He appealed to his employer for the measure. He could not understand how someone who happened to hear about the demonic small hand technique could make such suggestions to a warrior. The dark swordsman said that without the contract he would have long lived 100 years ago with his own hands free. But he could not finish. The heavenly demon still stood, held his finger up, and stared absent-mindedly into his eyes. The swordsman had nothing to do but remain silent because he was only a mercenary. And then, in a calm voice, he replied that as long as he didn't think it would work and asked me to suggest an alternative. The swordsman showed the vessel and explained that it was a condiment passed down in the school from generation to generation. He said he would use these spices to prepare a dish he had never tasted. Heavenly Demon couldn't even imagine how delicious it was. And he asked the swordsman why he was always hiding such spices. The swordsman replied that the contract about them was not a word. The demon agreed to conclude a new verbal contract. The swordsman confirmed that the contract was concluded. Then, the celestial demon decided to talk about the Kugel demonic attack of the small hand through the acupuncture point of the Palace of Labor. What is on the palm of the swordsman told him to shut up, and here they can be heard, and suggested that they change places. They climbed the stairs to the school's roof, and Kuok-gen asked if that was enough. He added that he couldn't wait for a dish of his secret seasonings, at which point the dark swordsman hesitated. He thought that the demon clearly explained the basics and levels of demonic attack in small hands, as he did not believe that such a thing could be heard by chance, as he is related to the demonic school. But the demon said there was no such clause in their verbal contract, but offered to extend the contract, to which the swordsman replied to shut up. He couldn't understand how he knew the demonic school's legacy, and that this brat was of the same level as him until now, doing a mercenary job for the demonic school. Kuok-gen continued that he would have to ask the Dark Blood Squad leader about it once and turned to the mercenary. He asked if the swordsman knew why his last attack had failed. The swordsman didn't know what he was talking about and if there was any reason for it, but he asked why. He began to tell us that the small hand attack is a technique based on sound energy. When the technique is used by girls, the attack can show itself maximally. Secondly, he was hindered by the wrong reaction to the enemy's attack, and in this case, the fire should have been suppressed by fire. The swordsman was shocked at how. The demon explained that if the demonic attack of the small hand is a yin technique, then there is also a yang technique. He suggested, for example, the demonic attack of the bloody hand, at which point the swordsman was stunned that he also knew about this attack. The swordsman tried defending himself and replied that his opponent used a sword with powerful fire. If he used fire in such a situation, it would be a battle of whose flames were greater. But the demon objected that the demonic attack of the bloody hand is not just a technique containing flames. If the technique is honed to perfection, it will reach a state of indestructible water and fire. Even the swordsman didn't know that his eyes were rounded, and he asked what indestructible by water and fire meant. Demon replied that he could cope with the enemy that uses fire energy, which is certainly a pain. Still, if you block the energy of fire, everything will be much simpler, except the ability to properly control the sword. He was sure that judging by his skills he could do it, but the swordsman realized that getting used to the fire technique comes naturally through training. He thought that the employer was really right, but the problem was something else entirely. The heavenly demon couldn't understand the problem for a warrior like him. I asked him if he wanted to say that he didn't possess the demonic attack of the bloody hand and hit a 10. It turns out that the demonic attack of the small hand is only half mastered, and the bloody hand hasn't been studied at all. And the demon again offered to extend his contract if he wanted him to. He told about the demonic attack of the bloody hand. The swordsman was furious and said to die, and no way he would not do it. He did not understand why he should believe him. Demon had no reason to lie and said since he didn't trust him, he would have to make him trust him. He tore a small piece of cloth off his uniform and with a bloody finger wrote something there. The demon gave the swordsman this piece of cloth, took it in his hands and began to write something. He said he could decide after first. He just needed to take a look. Kuok-gen quickly wrote on the collar and asked him to look. The swordsman asked what it was. When he received the answer that this preview was the kugel of the initial stage of the demonic attack of the small hand, the swordsman once again asked. The demon asked him, wondering what was next, and said it would be perfect if he agreed to another month of contract. The swordsman was. He wasn't adamant, and replied that he would have to think about it. The heavenly demon thought that even if some members of his school survived in reality, it was no different from a complete extermination. However, if you think about it, there was nothing to be surprised about. He is now living in a world inhabited by monsters. The Jung Yi-Sa clans have formed an alliance to deal with these monsters, and the demonic school has been destroyed by a fool named King Lich. And summarize that such a world would not seem strange for those who originally lived in this time. At that moment, Mu Ren and his team approached the roof. The sky demon muttered to himself, saying that he had come himself. He asked him how he knew to come up here, and Mu Ren replied that he had sent the four-eyed man to find him. He laughed that they had such a strong friendship and suggested we start before his buddy arrived. He said that Li Han likes everything that is logical and reasonable. However, he suggested listening to this, and went on to say that this school enrolls types who don't belong here, and they do it not through ability but through money and connections. He let him in on the secret that he was sick of people like that from scum, like Khan donating to the academy. The heavenly demon didn't understand what he was talking about, what connections, or what donations he was referring to. At that moment, an episode that his father had a plan surfaced in his memories. His father told him he knew a master with connections in the Heavenly Warrior Academy. He told him not to worry because he had a great memory. I asked him to try hard because many want to join this academy, even for large sums of money. Heavenly Demon realized what the trick was. He realized that Li Khan was hated because he entered the academy through a donation and thought it was a kindergarten reason. When Mu Ren finished laughing at him, he asked if he had become uncomfortable, to which the Heavenly Demon only mumbled in response. He repeated his question and became uncomfortable. After all, they had insulted his parents and said he was scum. He asked, probably uncomfortable after such expressions. Heavenly Demon was sure that he was provoking him and hoped that he would lose his temper and lash out at him. Mu Ren was surprised and thought that it seemed that the same tactics several times did not work on him. He added that before, he would have jumped on him like a madman and done something no one expected. Mu Ren took a stance and was about to hit him. He added that he would get bored if he pretended to be brave. I offered him the opportunity to try striking him first, and he waited for a response from the celestial demon. Ku again replied that he didn't care who was first and asked if he could take his punch. Murin ordered him to attack and not worry about him, calling him a puppy. The heavenly demon quickly took a stand and said he wouldn't talk for long. Mu Ren thought that he had completely lost his mind. He didn't understand which toilet his distinction between logic and reasonableness had been flushed in, and he decided that it would be necessary to correct his manners today. The heavenly demon accepted the heavenly supremacy Qigong technique. It said if he could beat him, then let him just try. He lunged at the Mu Ren and knew his external energy would crumble his fist, but he didn't have time to finish speaking. The classmate certainly didn't expect this. His eyes rounded, and he was amazed at what this boy could do. He asked for strength from his patrons and wanted to strike himself, but he didn't have time to do so. At this moment, the heavenly demon slammed his fist into his chest with all his strength. The blow was so decisive that his chest was dented from the pain. His eyes turned white, and Mu Ren flew to the side. When struck, the Heavenly Supremacy Qigong technique releases a tremendous force. The rib cage might not be able to withstand such an onslaught. Mu Ren yelled with all his strength. Even he couldn't understand what had happened or where Li Han got such strength. He flew through the standing friends across the roof and crashed forcefully into the stone wall. His friends were blown around by the wind like a hurricane as it blew past them. Heavenly Demon said that he knew someone who also asked him to hit him and said that he was getting stronger, begging him to beat him again and again. And he added that he may have died in the process and asked his friends if they should get hit once or not. Mu Ren's friends were very scared. They were shocked by what they saw and didn't want them to get hurt either. They couldn't understand how Li Han could hit Mu Ren or what the hell was going on, so they all ran to him. At this very moment, Mu Ren was lying on his back and couldn't even move. His chest hurt so badly that his friends asked if he was all right. He was lying on his back and breathing heavily, and he couldn't tell them anything but that he was a ghost. One of the friends thought he was dead, but after a closer look, they realized he was alive and decided to drag him away from the place. One of the friends shouted for the other to move the baton sooner, or Mu Ren might skate off. At this very moment, Seo Jin was sitting on the stairs, thinking he was again in the same class as Baek Mu Ren. He thought that if he went to the roof, he'd get punched in the face and saw a picture of his friends dragging Mu Ren unconscious. They carried him by his arms and legs and thought he wasn't even moving when Seo Jin ran into them. When he saw Mu Ren unconscious, he was shocked and couldn't utter anything. He just stood there with his mouth open. He shouted that it was Baek Mu Ren, but no one said why he was in such bad condition or what had happened to him. Seo Jin couldn't understand what was happening. One of his friends noticed the foam on Mu Ren's face and started carrying him even faster to save him. At this moment, the heavenly demon saw his friend and asked if it was him and what he was doing there. He asked Seo Jin what he was doing here, but Seo Jin couldn't string a couple of words together. He only incoherently answered with a few phrases. The demon replied that he was talking about the type and would be fine. He thought it was one of the entrance tests for the second year, and it looks like he passed it. He suggested forgetting about that companionship and going to Seo Jin's next class. Seo Jin agreed. The heavenly demon clarified that it should be the fourth lesson already on the count, isn't it? The friend couldn't even answer him. He didn't recognize his friend. Seo Jin thought that if this was the same Li Han he knew, he didn't know him that badly. He thought there was another person beside him and decided to find out what had happened to him a little later. The heavenly demon was very excited to attend the fourth lesson, which was on the theory of foreign species. The teacher's name was Hachian Qian. The instructor began to tell me that this creature was called a necromancer and suggested that I study more about it. However, first, he decided to ask a question. He asked if anyone knew when the necromancer was discovered. One of the students raised his hand, decided to respond, and asked to be allowed to respond. It was So Mung-yang. The teacher allowed him to answer, and the student thanked him and began his answer. He said that 140 years ago, the Kunlun mountain range opened a gateway to another dimension. From there, foreign creatures with unusual powers appeared. 67 years later, in the first dungeons, a necromancer was found. The teacher praised the student and said that he answered correctly, concisely, and clearly. Then the teacher asked if he knew the name of the dungeon. Seo Mung-yang said that the Banshee dungeon was named so because many weeping evil Banshee spirits were found inside. The teacher praised him and said that he answered everything correctly, which was an answer worthy of the title of one of the best students in the academy. Nothing unnecessary was said. The girls at the next desk were gossiping about him and saying what a great teacher he was. They opened their textbooks and looked at the illustration of the Banshee. He said that the trait that unites all these creatures is their female physical appearance, and if you hear them crying, you instantly die. The students from the Shaolin Temple raised his hand and clarified why he was suddenly talking about the Banshee. He had said that they would be studying the material on the necromancer. The answer he got was that he thought they were well aware of the necromancer's abilities, one of which is mind control using black magic. He asked if they remembered the dungeon that Seo Mung-yang had told the student about, and the student said yes, they did. The teacher continued that while exploring the Banshee dungeon, a necromancer was found on a throne in the depths. At the end of the dark, as pitch-black dungeons, in addition to the dangerous banshees, there were many monsters with a 6th-level threat, such as the Death Knight. After the necromancer's death, the dungeon became quiet. In summary, the teacher hinted that when fighting with the necromancer, they would have to fight not only with him alone. Ha Cheon asked if the lesson topic was now clear, to which the students replied that it was. He asked the students to flip a page of the textbook, but at that moment, a heavenly demon approached him and asked him to look at him. Ha Cheon reluctantly turned to Li Han and allowed him to ask his question, waiting for his answer. Li Han stood up and said that he also had a question. The teacher thought this was the same kid that had been rumored. He asked where he had to go to catch that goat, and the teacher was shocked at the question's wording. Ha Cheon had heard about this student's insolence, but when he saw it with his own eyes, he was shocked and had nothing to say. Li Han explained that he was talking about this necromancer and clarified his location. At this moment, something interesting happened in the Heaven Warrior Academy in the central building. On the door hung a handle in the shape of a dragon with a large ring. Someone took the handle and knocked on it. Ku Yun-cheon asked if the department chair was in. She said yes and let him come in. A young girl with long, beautiful hair was shedding at her place signing papers. She clarified the need to approve the documents, and the department head of administration responded that it was correct. He handed her a small folder of paperwork to check and sign with her own hand. The department chair began to review the documents her supervisor had brought her and had a couple questions. She couldn't believe that so many dungeons had appeared in Sichuan and asked the leader about it. He replied that over 20 new dungeons had been discovered in Sichuan alone this year. He said that if the dungeons spread throughout Zhongyuan, they would be uncountable. He added that they could have a serious problem ahead of them if the number of dungeons that have appeared exceeds those that have been cleared. But the headmistress assured me there was no need to worry about the number of dungeons because most were inhabited only by ghouls or low-level monsters, and asked if such a thing wouldn't help build up the students' real combat experience. The deputy said that, of course, she was right about that. The superintendent asked how the raid on the newly appeared dungeon's demonic ruins was progressing. Ku Yun Cheon replied that if she was referring to that punitive plan, it had been decided to assign it to the instructors of the Heaven Warrior Academy. She was confused, and the other academies were in serious disagreement. Of course, the case was given to them, and sometimes, from the Murim Union, there was nagging. The leader said that the real combat instructor, Cheun Bi, spoke in defense. Thanks to him, there were no significant disagreements. She knew that Sword King Cheun Bi was among Murim's top 10 warriors and was not opposed to the instructor's personal participation in the raid. However, even with such support in the dungeon, one must be highly cautious compared to previous dungeons. Now, she senses a slightly different energy from the necromancer there. She couldn't explain it, but it bothered her greatly, and she told me about her fears. The leader thought about it and reasoned that if someone who can see everything in the world says she feels anxious, it's not good. He would surely consider those words, but she had also forgotten one crucial thing. She asked about a student from the demonic school who had recently joined them. She asked how he was getting used to studying, and the head of the school asked if he was a dark swordsman. He said the swordsman had completed the opening battle and was already settling into the academy, which was good news. She warned that even if the instructors say he lacks something or has shortcomings, they should not pressure the student from the demonic school, which can be helpful to them, and asked that when the opportunity arose, the manager organize a meeting for them. He was shocked and asked if she wanted to see him in person because she had refused all the Kanho clansmen who wanted to meet her. Here, the first one who desired to organize a meeting confirmed that her words were valid. You said you understood her and asked permission to leave. He called her by name. It was Lig Weather. So this beautiful girl who wandered into the woods 140 years ago is the head of the department. At this moment in the 4th lesson, the heavenly demon was trying to find out the necromancer's exact location. The student's question shocked everyone, and the teacher moved closer to look at the student in the face. The students didn't understand what this information would give him, and thought it would be better for him to sit quietly and keep quiet. Seo Mongyeong realized that Li Han was being so clever and was again getting in the wrong place. The girls didn't understand what was wrong with Li Han and why he was acting like this before. His friend Seo Jin couldn't stand his constant shenanigans anymore and asked what he was doing again. Ha Cheon didn't seem upset or concerned as he stood watching. I pondered the answer. Now he realizes about whom the head of the department had received a special order. It's just a youngster who doesn't know anything about the world yet. Of the academy graduates this year, 6 had already died at the hands of a necromancer, and the bodies of half of them had not even been recovered. He thought that a terrible tragedy would happen if such unintelligent children continued to poke around in the dungeon. The teacher said that information about the location of the dungeons is a top secret that is only available to senior students. He may foolishly lose his life, so he will only tell you in general terms. He began to say that there are 3 known places in the country where the necromancer resides, and one of them was recently discovered in Sichuan province, and continued that the dungeon is not so far from here. It is located on northern Muta Mountain. This place is on the very outskirts. Even the people of Sichuan are not familiar with it. He added that even if he wanted to go there, he would not be allowed to go by the Murim Alliance's warriors carefully guarding the dungeon's entrance, and offered to return to the lesson. The teacher asked Li Ha to open the 3rd page of the textbook, which described the features and magic of the necromancer, but Li Ha no longer heard anything. He knew the name of the mountain. It was enough for him. If he finds a map of that place, everything will go well. He pondered the need to punish this mercenary case. He thought to himself that he was already flying to Needon. At this very moment, the dark swordsman returned after the battle to his office for his next class. He opened the door and went in, but no one was in the classroom. He wondered why no one had come, yet they were probably all still dueling. The dark swordsman sat down at his desk in a chair. He was very tired, exhausted. This fight had exhausted him. He held up the scrap of collar the heavenly demon had given him, and couldn't figure out how he knew everything. He looked at the scrap carefully, not trying to find any clue or answer to his question. He thought that if the employer was not from the demonic school, he had no idea where he was from, and if he knew about the demonic small hand attack, he could be trusted. At this point, the Dark Swordsman was angry again because the flap didn't say everything. He thought the heavenly demon had only written about the peculiarities of throwing fire. Still, there was no mention of using the energy. The swordsman was psychotic and thought that he was teasing him. He deliberately cut off the flap at the most interesting moment. The swordsman was ready to die of curiosity about what was next. He pondered that it was worth thinking hard for 1 month of recruitment in exchange for a secret book describing the demonic attack technique of the bloody hand. It was difficult for him to decide, and he left the matter for later because he was exhausted. His immediate concern now was to rewrite the opening, Kugel, demonic attack, bloody hand, so as not to forget. And he began to describe Kugel's demonic attack, bloody hand, through an acupuncture point in the palm of the Palace of Labor. At that moment, someone came into the office and said, "You can't be beaten." Namnug-ho and his friends understood that losing a swordsman from a distinguished family would be a significant embarrassment. Namgung-ho playfully grabbed his friend by the neck and said they could settle it at swords if he had a grievance. They quickly put their things on the table and raced to the stall before class started. They saw the Dark Swordsman and said that it was the same type from the demonic school. After the opening battle, they all went to the party to get to know each other, which is why he was sitting in the office alone. Namgung-ho wondered whether the swordsman was already doing a written analysis of their fight with the Prime. He laughed that it was expected. A friend reminded him to drop the things, and they had already gone to the stall. But he told them to go without him because he suddenly had a job to do. His friends didn't understand what he would do, but they left him alone and went to the stall. Namgung Ho walked over to the Dark Swordsman to see what he was doing alone and wanted to ask him something. Passing by, he looked at his sheet and saw that he had written a lot. He thought the swordsman had learned so much from them fighting. He thought that he had put in a lot of hard work, and maybe the fact that he had defeated him was just a fluke. He decided that if a worthy opponent is working hard, he can't sit idly by if he doesn't work hard to catch up with him in terms of strength. It will only be a matter of time before he catches up. He thought to himself that their fight with the Dark Swordsman was just beginning, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. In the 4th lesson, the teacher repeated again that a necromancer is considered a frightening creature because of his black magic. The curse can affect the organs of sight, hearing, and smell. The celestial demon thought that the necromancer turned out to be a toucan only with the help of some dirty curse to control the servants, and alone cannot do anything. At this point, the teacher decided to ask only one question. Whoever answered correctly would get 10 points for behavior this semester. He started by asking if the textbook gave information on fighting against a necromancer. He asked to tell if anyone knew the material not mentioned in the book. So Mungyung raised his hand at the moment, and the teacher allowed him to answer the question. The student thanked him for it. He began to say that the power competing with magic, in other words, in a battle against a necromancer, uses weapons that contain anti-magic energy. If you use such a weapon, there is a sacred power able to resist black magic. The instructor wondered about the sacred weapon, that the answer you are pretty full of is not what he wanted to hear, and asked, no one wanted, and complimented the answer. Seo Mong-eun was upset. He thought he had given the answer in full. After a while, a hand showed itself, and to complete the answer, the lovely girl wanted. No one expected it to be her, so Mun-yog said, "Teacher, you are very interested." She started saying that holy weapons are a good option in a battle against black magic, which cannot be denied. She said that such equipment is scarce, so the realism of being able to resist magic is unlikely to decrease. Squads participating in the raid on the necromancer are different from the usual. He continued that there are at least 10 people, maybe more, and since not every member of the squad can be the heir of a prominent family, using sacred weapons against a necromancer is a difficult idea to realize. The teacher then asked what to do and if she was suggesting that there was a more realistic method. This girl replied that there is an honest and straightforward method: fire. The instructor did not expect this turn of events and asked what the reason for this response was. She said that the source of black magic is darkness. The natural power to expel darkness can weaken the enemy's abilities. Also, if you oil the weapon and set it on fire, the destructive power of fire can be used as a method of purification. The teacher praised her. He said that Seo Mong-eun's answer was also correct, but Un So-ren expressed a more plausible point of view, and this way would indeed be more universal. The teacher praised them and said he had nothing more to add, so he awarded them 10 points each. They didn't thank the teacher, but Seo Mong-yeong thought the teacher gave him points for nothing. At this moment, So-jin asked Lee Han who she was and thus pulled him away from his thoughts. He couldn't understand who Seo-jin was talking about, so Jin explained the very popular Un So-ren, who was first ranked in his first year. He went on to say that besides her marvelous beauty, she also possesses a brilliant mind, impeccable behavior, and patronage, and could be said to represent the entire Heaven Warrior Academy. Seo-jin was in love with this unreal beauty, but the heavenly demon didn't notice any marvelous beauty in her, and said that she was scared on. So Ren happened to overhear this conversation and blushed. The heavenly demon said she wasn't even up to cute, but Seo-jin didn't let him finish and covered his mouth with his hands. But he still managed to get out that since the man's face didn't really come out and say what the problem was, Seo Mong-yeong was very angry at what he heard and thought, how dare he say that? The teacher stood there the whole time, listening to what was happening in the classroom, and did not interfere. The teacher turned to Lee Han, and one of the students noticed that Lee Han was not paying attention in the right direction. The teacher added that he also didn't listen to the class, which was very frustrating because it was an important topic. The heavenly demon said he was listening about sacred weapon fire and all those useless things, and added that there's a much simpler way to do it that doesn't require a lot of brain power. The teacher's facial expression changed drastically. He said that he was very confident. He was blabbering, and it appeared that he knew a better method against the necromancer. And the teacher took a pen and asked Lee Han to tell them about such an unusual method. He was warned to answer without joking. If he answered wrong, he'd have to repeat the year. The sky demon agreed and believed that the goat necromancer, without his curse that the mind controls, was just a pacifier. He said that we should just crush him before he uses the curse. The teacher replies that he understands and that there is no point in listening any further. He added that no sacred power can help against a power many times greater than it, and suggested that he relearn the material from the first year. The teacher was shocked and couldn't understand what he was talking about, or what power he had to absorb the darkness. I asked him what he meant and what this power is that absorbs the darkness. The teacher inquired whether Lee Han, who was originally wielding something like this, knew exactly the answers and was confident in him, and calmly and confidently said that such power has existed since ancient times. He spoke now of men who could use the power of darkness to punish monsters, and continued that their name was the Heavenly Demon Sacred School, thus causing the teacher to be stunned. The demon said that if a necromancer is the embodiment of darkness, then they are the ones who suck out the darkness. There was silence in the classroom. The teacher also thought and listened very carefully to what the demon was saying. A little later, the class started whispering. No one understood what this guy was talking about. One of the students asked what he was talking about, as they hadn't heard anything about the Heavenly Demon Sacred School. One answered that it was a clan exterminated 140 years ago, and another confirmed that they were now considered just bandits. His friend So-jin didn't know what he was talking about, but he wouldn't and couldn't interrupt him. Un So-ren said that it would be ridiculous if such an organization remained. They wouldn't even go to the academy. She thought the instructor didn't react to that answer either, but the teacher's pen was writing at that moment. She couldn't understand why the teacher reacted so vividly to what he had heard. A teacher was writing in his notebook with a quill when he suddenly dropped it, and it fell to the floor. It spun through the air a few times, clattered on the floor, and fell right under his feet. The pen hit the floor, tapping several times, and only this pen broke the silence in the office. The teacher stood unmoving, and at this moment, the feather kept bouncing on the floor and tapping. The entire class froze. After hearing about the Heavenly Demon Sacred School, it felt like time had stopped. The teacher stood like a stump and could not utter a word. He stared at him in amazement. When he came to his senses, he was furious and couldn't understand why this insolent man could say such things aloud. The disciple was thinking about her own life, so Mong-yeong couldn't understand why Lee Han called her a bogeyman and how he could say such a thing. Un So-ren didn't understand the power that absorbs darkness. Seo-jin was tired of being surprised by everything and was amazed by his friend's antics. At this moment, the heavenly demon reached out his hand to his friend Seo-jin and wanted to give something away. He addressed him by name and called him to his room. At this point, the friend was very scared and didn't know what to expect. Demon said that he had a very important day today and that he would go to see him tomorrow. His friend said that the class was not over yet and asked if he was going to go to the next class. But the demon said that he looked at the textbook, which has all the lesson material. So if you buy the book in general terms, you will understand what was in the lesson and asked not to worry. When he said goodbye, he told him to be there and left. Seo Jin only looked at him. The sky demon jumped out from behind his desk, jumped out of his chair, and ran straight for the door through everyone. Only isolated phrases about Muth's grief and being a mercenary sounded in his head. The teacher was amazed at the student's insolent behavior, but could do nothing about it. When Li Han ran out of the classroom, the teacher saw his quill lying on the floor. He crushed it. The teacher was very upset because the head of the department had given him this pen, and the kid had stepped on it. The teacher remembered that it was Li Han and said he would add 10 behavior points to him a little later. The teacher said that the lesson was over and everyone had done well and asked me to clean up the floor before the next class. Unso Ren thought that Instructor Ha's expression was so surprised. In the entire country, you can't find a better monster theory and dungeon expert than him. She thought about what Li Han said about absorbing darkness, so it was possible. She decided to ask her great-grandmother, who must have known exactly that. Unso Ren immediately stood up and said that she had to meet someone urgently and would not be able to attend class. When Xiao Mong Yun heard all of this, he was very curious to know who she went out with other than Li Han. She left class and went to her great-grandmother's house when her classmate ran into her. Xiao Mong Yun's friend said he was back, but the friend didn't hear him. Then he asked why he was staring at the door to the auditorium like that. Isn't he waiting for him? Xiao Mong Yun replied to let him score, and the friend began to tell Xiao Mong Yun something significant and interesting in his ear. He asked if it was true, and the friend assured him that Sunbei from their family had personally verified it. He said that when he first came, the two were together, and after the fight was over, he said that he had seen him very recently next to Li Han. Seo Mongyeong speculated that it was a guy from a demonic school, and whether Li Han's insolence had anything to do with him. If you think about it, maybe he realized where the roots of his arrogance came from. If he had a demonic school or someone else behind his back, his friend thought perhaps he'd been hired as a guard by a rich offspring. Even so, Li Han had already crossed the line. A friend suggested giving him a warning, but Sun Yong said he didn't need one. He added that it seemed that not only them but the Shaolin Temple disciples were also tense. He thought they were furious because the Shaolin Temple pays great attention to students' manners and behavior, and they were going to teach him a lesson with their methods. So Minyan reminded me how the martial arts assessment is done in the second year. A friend confirmed that it is a group hunt, and several people will divide the group. He added that if Li Han could catch monsters, he would show them. They thought he might get scared and run away from the monsters. He was sure that, in terms of strength, their team would never be outmatched and they would give it their skills. Somun En closed his eyes and remembered everything that had happened in the classroom just before this moment. How Li Han talked about the most beautiful girl in the academy upset her. Until now, he couldn't remember how to calm himself and immediately started to get angry with Li Han. I remember how he tried to be smart in front of everyone and show his abilities to the fullest. He was sure that after embarrassing himself, he'd know where he belonged. Somanen's indignation was unbounded. He was so upset and agitated that he didn't know what to do. At this time, the Dark Swordsman continued to write a kugel about the demonic attack of the Bloody Hand. Nam Gung Ho was paying close attention to what he was doing. He was surprised at how much he had already written in his notebook, and he wasn't going to stop. His persistence shocked me, and I thought he had been writing something on paper for 2 hours without a break. He didn't realize that he had really gained so much new knowledge from their fight, he could barely write 3 sentences. He was intensely curious to know the secret of his analytical skills. He walked over to the Dark Swordsman, and although he was a little uncomfortable, he asked one question. Only Nam Gung Ho turned to the Dark Swordsman as the celestial demon flew in. The demon turned to him, called him mercenary, and said that he had found it and that they should go. Nam Gung Ho was slightly surprised and didn't understand who addressed the Dark Swordsman. When the celestial demon saw the numbers on the cabinet, he was shocked and couldn't believe he was a first year. He said that he was in his second year, but it turned out that he was older than him. The swordsman upset him and said that these are Arabic numerals and they are read the other way around, so it is the 4th year. The swordsman reminded him that his lessons weren't over yet. The demon thought he was a model student and was just made for studying at the academy. He asked him to shut up for God's sake, but the sky demon didn't realize what he said was wrong. He asked who was standing behind him and if it was his buddy. The swordsman didn't expect there to be someone behind him. He turned around and saw Nam Gung Ho apologize for the heavenly demon's rude behavior and said to forgive him. But the heir answered easily and said it was no big deal and fine. Nazladik couldn't understand what the dark swordsman had written. The handwriting was so small that he couldn't see a thing. The sky demon was shocked that his employer was telling him to go, and he couldn't get his butt out of his chair. Demon said, "That means we have to cancel that offer." The swordsman was furious and said that with the heir, he would see the next time. When the swordsman asked what had happened, the demon said that he had found something and needed to go faster, but he did not say what exactly he had found. He told the swordsman to follow him, but Nam Gung Ho couldn't understand who he was if he was dismissive of the dark swordsman. The swordsman couldn't believe it and asked if he was serious about going there. The demon said yes. The swordsman only wanted to ask if he wanted to think first, but the demon was already gone and the swordsman rushed after him, shouting for him to wait. Suddenly a voice said that he had finally found Nam Gung Ho, but he couldn't understand whose voice it was. It was his uncle. He was shocked and asked how he was there. His uncle congratulated him and said that he had won first place in the Pimu fight. His uncle came to tell him the good news and asked if he was ready. Nam Gung Ho couldn't believe it had already been decided. He took a thank you stand and said he was always ready. Uncle laughed and couldn't believe he was so happy about it. Nam Gung Ho thought it would not work out because the mission is kept top secret, and it is forbidden to be present during it. And he added that since he was already allowed to participate, he'd better work a little more complicated. Nam Gung Ho clarified the threat level and said that storming the dungeon is the best addition to the student's biography. The uncle answered that for 12, although it was previously known that the maximum threat level is 9. Nam Gung Ho said this was the highest level, but uncle warned that he was understating it. There was already talk of identifying a new threat level. He now understood why academy students were forbidden to participate in the mission and asked who was assigned leadership this time. Uncle clarified whether he meant the commander of the punitive squad. The uncle said he had been serving him for years and thus shocked the poor fellow. Nam Gung Ho couldn't believe that his uncle was talking about him, but this was happening on the outskirts of Sichuan, on a mountain. A warrior in red boots climbed up to the outskirts and came to the very edge of the cliff. He was very tall and of sturdy build, blindfolded and standing on the edge of a precipice. He thought he was finally back in Sichuan and remembered how long it had been. He was so used to the view, but it felt like he hadn't seen it in ages. It was Real Combat Kingsword instructor Qian B. He had dreamed of meeting Mrs. Ligweather for the first time in a long time, and thought that this time, the expedition had dragged on long. The meeting was scheduled for the Dragon's Tavern. Now, in Sichuan Province, Jintang County Dragon Tavern was having a meeting. There were a lot of people here, all talking and drinking tea. The warriors had a delicious lunch and joked about various topics at the table. They had been here often. One of them asked to bring dongpo pork and 2 cups of bamboo tea from the waiter. Suddenly, someone turned to the waiter insolently and shouted at him by the employee, to which he was shocked. Everyone turned to the voice and couldn't figure out who it could be at this hour. And they saw the Sword King. The worker said that if he had known he was coming, he would have prepared everything in advance, but the king didn't want to make a fuss. He clarified with the employee that the location was the same, and the employee confirmed and pointed to the top floor. Sword King Che Yunbai was a serious warrior who went to the 2nd floor. He told him to get to work and that the king would stop by later, and he thanked him. One of the visitors was very glad it was an absolute good fortune. He would never have considered seeing a gentleman here, but the other only asked who he was. He was surprised he was from Murim and didn't know who it was. He said the Sword King was one of the 10 strongest warriors the Alliance recognized. Mr. Che Wun Bing is the best among the masters who have cleared several dozen dungeons, and it could be argued that the Sword King's peaceful life in Sichuan is a merit. He went on to say that as a native of Sichuan Province, he was the first warrior to receive the nickname of Swordmaster. The nickname Swordmaster is the same as level transformation, which is once again repeated by the visitor. He went upstairs to the academy administration, where he had already been greeted. Parole said hello to Li Jungu and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. In return, he also greeted the gentleman and said that he was expected inside. When he entered the office, the deputy heads and the head of the academy were already waiting for him at the table. Liegeweather said hello to the Sword King and said he had done a great job on the last expedition. The king greeted her back and asked if the development of the magical weapons they had talked about a few days ago was going well, to which she said, of course it was. The Sword King looked around at everyone at the table, said hello to them, and saw one of the instructors. He thought that even the instructor in Wolsan had come as a dungeon instructor. The king was surprised that even instructor Ha Qian was also present at the table at the meeting. He thought that the heads of the administration department here greeted the king and said how many years and how many winters they had not seen each other. The king thought that the composition of this meeting without words speaks of the scale of the upcoming assault. He clarified how many floors there were in the dungeon and assumed that there were about 8. Big Weather, the superintendent, motioned for the meeting to begin and asked the Sword King to be seated. The king asked what size the dungeon was, but the superintendent replied that it was better to see it for yourself than to explain it in words. With one wave of her hand, the superintendent lifted the stack of sheets with magic and tossed them upwards. She swirled these sheets with her hand to create a magical space. Surprised, the king assumed it was a void-filling matter or telekinesis he could not understand. She manipulated these sheets using her magical abilities to fold them into one sheet. The sheets of paper were folded individually, and some kind of picture began to show. They became larger and larger and overlapped, filling the entire space around them. They became so huge that they took up an entire table and lined up in a stack with the distance between them. The deputy administrator could not believe what he saw, and the superintendent was also surprised when she received the reconnaissance results. She added that even that is not an accurate picture of the 10 members of the advance party. More than half of them are dead. The king explained that even in that creepy cert dungeon there were 10 floors, but here there were 15. He couldn't believe it and asked what Instructor Wolsan thought about it. The instructor said this was the first necromancer to build a large-scale dungeon. He thinks that he used a fair number of servants for it. Well, suddenly the instructor noticed something wrong. He squinted his eyes and stared somewhere. He asked the department chair to put all the cards together. She asked, which means he noticed something too. As everyone has already realized, the dungeon consists of 15 floors, and putting all the cards together makes the picture very confusing. He continued that from the 1st to the 8th floor, you can see the character Knight, which has 8 features, and from the 9th to the 11th character fork, in which 3 features, 8 plus 3, make 11. Wolsan noticed that from the 12th to the 15th hieroglyph, the word king, consisting of 4 traits, means a total of 15. This makes it clear that the shape of the dungeon forms the word King Yaksha. The deputy administration noted that such an assumption does occur, and he thought it was far from a mere coincidence. The instructor said he didn't know if it was real, but it seemed too early to be surprised. The floors from the 1st to the 15th have stone slabs made of magic stones that react to mana. The king thought that if you look at the stone slabs of each floor separately, you can see nothing but by connecting the maps. The instructor said that you get an inverted 5-pointed star, the symbol of the devil, the pentagram. The meeting members were shocked, especially when the deputy administration came to a standstill. Ha Cheon was confused. He was so surprised that he couldn't say a word. The instructor said this is not even close to a coincidence, and it can be undeniably stated that the magic circle is a powerful curse enveloping the entire dungeon. The Sword King stood silently with his arms folded across his chest, needing time to digest the information. Ha Qian couldn't believe that the dungeon was infused with such high-grade black magic, and he thought it was too much for a necromancer. He appealed to the superintendent that if it was all true, he had started his invasion. The warden said it looked like it and appealed to the Lord of the Death Spirits, Mephisto. She lifted this pentagram to read it and twirled her hand for comfort. It was precisely as Instructor Wolsan said, and it was terrific. The magic circle has a 3-stage curse. First curse compulsion, second mind control magic. The superintendent was very frightened and wanted to call the last one, but the king told him not to worry so much. The department head looked at the Sword King and didn't understand why he was saying that. He explained that it doesn't matter what kind of dungeon it is. The main thing is to clear it, and if the enemy is not easy, you can get a lot of helpful knowledge from him. He continued that, moreover, he had never neglected the value of the nickname given to her by the Sword King, and was already ready even for Sura's life. The head of the department was very surprised. Its look was not afraid of danger. On the contrary, it was filled with a thirst for victory. She thought she had forgotten for a moment what the Zhongyuan warriors of this world were like. The instructor thought he should have expressed support instead of wasting worry and excitement, but he thought everyone understood. The dungeon to go to at this time is more dangerous than ever, because it is the first time the enemies have begun to act for real. The Sword King was not in the least bit frightened. He already had a plan that he wanted to put into action. The department chair turned to senior instructor Li Jungu and asked if he could hear her. She asked if the preparations for the hike had been completed, and the instructor replied that everything was ready. and said that the punishment squad dungeon demonic ruins is 13 men ready to depart at any time. The superintendent said that, as always, since her location should not be disclosed, it was impossible to go together. Still, she asked them not to forget that she was always with them in spirit. She gave the command to start storming the demonic ruins dungeon and said she would be waiting at the academy for their successful return. All the board members, including the senior instructor, said that's right and set off on the assault. At that moment, a student looking for a map arrived at the cultural history map shop. The shopkeeper said it was somewhere around here to look for a map of Mount Mutha. At that very moment, he found this map, took it off the shelf, and found it covered in dust. He asked what he needed the card for. Dark Swordsman said he needed it for something and asked how much he owed. The worker said that this card cost 10 gold. The nanny swordsman was shocked at such an amount. He said it was a robbery and asked where it was seen that the card cost a fortune. But the employee only thought that even a child could understand that it would not be cheap. He told him to scour all of Sichuan and find this map elsewhere, adding that drawing wasn't easy, and explained that several people went into the confusing labyrinth of the dungeon for the sake of this map, with 6 of them not even returning. The swordsman asked if clearing the dungeon would prevent the map worker from losing its use. The worker said that he did not understand anything, just the opposite, and continued that throughout the labyrinth, various chests and books scattered. Even if the storming of the dungeon is over inside, you can find many different items. Warriors in the storming cannot, after all, take with them absolutely everything. And he said that when there is a benefit, it is not a pittance of money, and for such a precious in all senses of the card, 10 nannies are just pennies. The swordsman agreed and thought his wallet was getting emptier and emptier after the hiring. He had already bought a few dozen textbooks at his employer's request and thought he should ask him for extra pay for such expenses. But he was sure this dungeon would be a grave for his employer. He only needed to master the demonic attack of the bloody hand, and he looked at what was next on his list. Next on the list was a chicken, which was necessarily alive. The swordsman could not understand why he needed a chicken in the dungeon. It was already evening when the heavenly demon was at his home, and the window light was burning. He read all the textbooks the swordsman had brought him and found nothing new or interesting. He had already read 62 textbooks. He closed it, and this was the last of them. He mouthed that he'd flipped through all those stacked books and emphasized that there was nothing special. He already knew most of the content, so he learned the material quickly and thought there would be no problems at the academy. The dark swordsman came in after finishing his business and informed his employer. The swordsman stood with a chicken in his hands, and the demon asked if he had bought everything, to which the swordsman angrily replied that he was blind. They agreed that there was a live chicken and a map of the dungeon. Nothing else was needed. The demon said, "No, this is enough." The demon praised him and said that everything is without a hitch every time he pleases him, and he performs just a miracle and not a mercenary. And the swordsman asked him when he would tell him about the demonic attack of the bloody hand. The employer replied that he would explain as soon as he returned from the dungeon. The swordsman thought that he had only gone to the other world from the dungeon. Suddenly it dawned on him that he would be at death, but that doesn't mean he can't learn about the demonic attack of the bloody hand. The way is still there. He decided to follow into the dungeon with his mercenary, which was his plan. And the swordsman had already imagined the picture of the demon begging to save him and saying he was wrong. And he was sure the man would beg him for help and tell him to help him before the monster showed up. And that, to me, the swordsman will take pity on him and say that there is no other choice. The demon will thank the mercenary for it. However, at that moment, the swordsman would think that nothing is free, much less life. And then he will tell him that if the desire to live has not yet disappeared, he must tell him the secret of demonic attack. A bloody-handed swordsman would never miss such a moment, and in exchange for life, he would make him tell him about the technique. After he finds out, he will leave the dungeon immediately. If all goes well, he will cancel the contract and get the secret of the technique. The dark swordsman told the demon that he too would go to the dungeon, which surprised him. He asked why he would go there and who would prepare the food. The swordsman replied that 2 hours would be enough. You could say that is the power of his spices. The demon was curious and asked if he would be helpful in the dungeon, and whether he would not be beaten like a pear once again. The swordsman was ready to kill him with his own hands, much faster than any necromancer. The sky demon asked if he was sure he wouldn't be the cart's fifth wheel, and the swordsman said he was giving a tooth. Ku Okeiken was determined and thought it was time to rip the necromancer's head off. The demon and the swordsman arrived on the outskirts of Sichuan on Mutha Mountain to enter the dungeon. And the hirer cautiously asked the mercenary if this was definitely the entrance to the dungeon. He said that according to the map, this was it, and asked what they would do now. At this moment, all the types from the Murim Union had built a stronghold to defend against the monsters. The demon said that times change, but the Union minions remain the same. He offered to pull them out of the way and to enter, but the swordsman stopped him and showed him something. He said that according to the map, there was a small path. Maybe someone had made it for a detour. He thought no one would be there and suggested we go there. But the demon stood his ground and asked why it was so difficult to just deal with these guards and enter through the main entrance. The swordsman asked him not to be an idiot and to follow him. They walked through a small forest to the entrance indicated on the map. The demon asked if he was sure this was the place to go, and the swordsman replied that they were already there. They saw an alternate entrance in front of them, and the demon rushed forward and told them to go through it. The dark swordsman said that such preparedness speaks of the mercenaries' excellent experience and skills, and it is much faster and safer to follow this path. The demon said that it was necessary to penetrate. The swordsman clarified what exactly needed to be penetrated, to which demon replied how he was going to enter. The swordsman replied that he didn't understand anything, and some monsters might come out. He added that the invasion should always be silent and swift and said to rely on him. The swordsman drew his sword and was about to enter this dungeon while Ku Oken and his chicken stood nearby. He charged his sword with magic, put internal energy into it, and prepared to open the entrance. He was like a laser through the boards with his sword without even touching them in 2 strikes. In these cut areas, the boards split apart and this entrance was opened for them. The dark swordsman thought it was very fortunate and worked out just as he had intended. He said they'd have to caulk the boards back up when they came in and called the hirer with him. The demon didn't understand why he was so hurried to get to the dungeon since he hadn't even ordered anything yet. He asked if he wasn't hiding anything from him, to which the swordsman pretended that he didn't understand anything and what it was about. Then the demon asked him if he had thought about asking him for the secret of the technique when he was dying in the dungeon and begging for rescue. The swordsman was dumbfounded. He had something urgent to say and decided to tell what he had learned from the map. And he started saying that he wanted to enter the dungeon as soon as possible. It's all because of the objects or otherwise sacred weapons. It has otherworldly power. In the dungeon, it's just darkness. The demon asked for otherworldly power, like it's good. The swordsman said that this was just fine. Moreover, sacred weapons are extremely expensive. There are even professional hunters for them. He added that the necromancer dungeon they were about to enter now was just a treasure trove. Perhaps they could find a lot of interesting things inside. The demon was curious about the sacred weapons. The demon realized what the reason was and made a hasty entrance. The swordsman exhaled a sigh of relief. The demon interjected, meaning the items would appear after destroying the monster. The swordsman confirmed it. And he put the boards in place and told him to stay out of it. Anything from the monsters is his. They entered a very dark dungeon and walked down a long, dark passage. At this moment, the dark swordsman stopped the demon and told him to wait a while. He asked what was wrong, and the swordsman replied that he needed to investigate the place. The moisture on the walls had dried up, and added that this phenomenon is unnatural, so impossible in a damp cave. Presumably, it is the footprints of a man or monster. Chui said he would concentrate and catch signs of someone's presence. Suddenly, some rustling was heard, and a little later, there was a clucking sound. It turned out that the chicken that was sitting on the demon's hands started clucking. The dark swordsman angrily asked the demon to shut her up with something. The heavenly demon couldn't understand why he wanted to shut the chicken up with something since it was doing its job just now. The swordsman asked about the point of her yelling at the top of her voice because the monsters would be the first to spot them at this rate. The hirer said that it was very stuffy and winging, and it would tell them everything just needed to be a peon and follow him. The swordsman thought the more one looked at him, the more one didn't understand what was happening in his head and whether he intended to trust a slightly sitting animal. But then he realized that it was to his advantage that he was on his way to certain death, and there was no point in talking him out of it. The swordsman decided to explore the map for now. He needed to secure a way to retreat just in case. He looked carefully at the map and realized that they were going according to the map. The swordsman thought he recognized that it was worth its money and that the card was made on conscience, so he decided to check how correct it was. They went forward, and he said that it looked like left, and now it is necessary to go to the right. So it was not for nothing that he gave a fortune for the map, and soon there would be a second floor. At the same moment, he thought that his employer had been on the right path all along, couldn't believe that a chicken was telling him the way, and decided to see how long his superstition would last. Percent sure he'll need a map soon because the dungeon fear starts on the second and third floors. And then the demon asked the swordsman, "If dungeons are always this long, maybe you can take a shortcut." The swordsman thought he was talking about it, and answered that this is the shortest way. If they go further in a straight line, there will be a staircase to the second floor. But at this point, things didn't go according to plan, and on the map, the swordsman was very surprised. The demon stated that there was no such thing on the map and that no one came here, but the swordsman did not foresee it. The swordsman said they'd have to choose one of two forks and gave the demon the decision. The chicken clucked a bit, informing the demon to go right. The dark swordsman disagreed and stopped him. He couldn't understand why he would trust such important decisions to a chicken. Did he really understand her clucking? The demon wondered what the big deal was here. The heavenly demon asked if he had brought the animal just for company. The chicken reported the entire situation in the dungeon, and the swordsman clarified how, and said that in front, at a distance of 7 meters, is a wall, which is also quite long and gentle, and there are 2 roads to the right and left, left, with a slope, and right angular. He said he realized from the winged one's scream that the sound in a confined space could be heard with 2 ears. He added that it was elementary, and asked why he was so surprised I couldn't understand. He wondered if he was going on. The demon that swinging rights is in his spirit, especially for someone new to the dungeon, is natural. He followed. He didn't like it, and offered to see how long his arrogance would last. At this point, he stepped into a small mud puddle and left his mark. And that's when the trail started to come to life. Something strange was going on. It was like it was smoking. And something terrible happened, and out of that trail came a monster arm that reached out to get someone. Subsequently, from every trail that the swordsman and demon left, monsters began to emerge after them. They were different sizes, and they got bigger and bigger. When they were completely out, they started to follow them. Their eyes were red, skeletons were among them, and they were looking for someone they wanted. One of the zombies was trying to say something to his friends, and his head was spinning on its axis. And then he suddenly saw the exact footprints the swordsman and the demon had left. He began to look at them a little closer, trying to figure out who they belonged to and where they had gone. He got low enough to see and smell the trail. He needed to know who it was from. He realized it was a human footprint, and he smelled real humanity. They all realized that a person was there, a resident of Zhongyuan, who was an intruder. They now have one goal, to find this invading Zhongyuan resident and ruin him. At this moment, the Sword King and his troop traveled to this very dungeon on Mount Mutha. Suddenly, the department head stopped Mr. Che Unbi and asked him to take something. She said she had brought this item with her in Zhongyuan. He clarified what it was and asked if it was a helmet. She said it was not just a helmet, but a relic called the Invisibility Cap, a helmet that could hide its wearer, which helped her escape from the Lich King and save herself. He realized it wasn't just a magic item and asked why she gave it to him. She replied that she didn't doubt his skills, but would keep the helmet with him just in case. He looked closely at that helmet and wondered what awaited him in the dungeon. He answered that he understood, and she looked at him with blue eyes and remained silent. She stood looking at him. He wore his helmet, thanked her, and said he was off. The clerk shouted after the Sword King that she relied on him and wished him good luck. The Sword King put on his invisibility hat, pulled out his magic blade, and entered the dungeon. He stood before the big gate, ready for battle, and told everyone to get in line. He mouthed that their primary goal was to clear the dungeon. Still, it was worth paying attention to safety more than anything else, and that no one should die in that dungeon because allies will turn into adversaries the moment they die. He said it was enough to accept that attention, and they already knew the rest. Warned that no matter how many enemies there are, they must destroy them all without a trace. The Ori began the invasion, and the horizon was clear with no signs of enemy presence nearby. He asked if anything unusual had happened, and the instructor replied that nothing had changed. The Sword King stood still and pondered. It was as quiet as if they had already been spotted. It had already been half an hour since they had gone inside, and still, not a flap of an insect wing, let alone monsters, was heard. They couldn't help but recognize that there were strangers here. The heavenly warrior Nanyang approached the Sword King and asked if he would have a moment. He said it would be nice to introduce him to someone, so he introduced the young leader of the Namgung family he had told him about earlier. The Sword King said that looking at him, you can tell he's adopted his father's spirit. He put his hand on his shoulder. Namgung-ho did not expect this and was very frightened. The king said he was sorry to hear about his father. He was an incredible man who had even found himself in debt a few times. The king said he had heard that he was a real talent in martial arts and offered to follow them. Namgung-ho was pleased and replied that he wouldn't hinder them and told him that for sure. The king said that this trip would serve him well and he should get to work. He added that they would talk more later and said that it was dangerous in the dungeon, so he should be on his guard. There was a fork in the road ahead of them. On the right side of the third was a wide path. The king said they would then set up a stronghold there. Uncle asked Namgung-ho how it felt to meet the Sword King in person. He said that he still had goosebumps all over his body. Just standing next to him, it felt like his energy was pressing down on him. Uncle warned him that he would gain a lot of knowledge from this trek. He would have to support him from the back if he came off the front. Namgung-ho obeyed his uncle and walked with him. The instructor said that only one student from Namgung-ho Academy, a fourth-year student, topped the rankings on this raid and asked if instructor Ha Qian knew him. But he didn't get an answer because instructor Ha Qian crouched on the ground and felt something. He put his hand on the ground and realized it was small vibrations and the monsters were coming straight for them. He shouted that a Class 4 situation had arisen and appealed to the Sword King to move into a defensive stance. Namgung-ho didn't understand what Class Number 4 was talking about, and they hadn't entered this place that long ago. The Sword King told everyone to leave the panic behind and ordered everyone to draw their swords immediately. He shouted. I called out to the squad for everyone to draw their blades, and Namgung-ho was also concerned. He still couldn't understand what was happening and why everyone had taken a defensive stance. Uncle said this doesn't happen often, and to keep him alert, everyone was on standby. Suddenly, from far away in the cave, a whole troop of evil and scary monsters came at them. They could smell the human scent and came closer and closer, faster and faster. The Sword King turned to the instructors, saying they needed to rattle their bones. He ordered everyone to rush to the attack, and the monster fight he had been waiting for began. At this moment, a heavenly demon and a dark swordsman were quietly walking from the other side of the dungeon. They padded down the stairs, but even the chicken was silent. Everything was calm and quiet, and the dark swordsman began to think something was amiss. He knew luck could happen, but he wondered if it wasn't a fluke. He thought they hadn't even met a single rat all this time. Still, he realized that his employer hadn't wandered once and had reached the second floor quietly, so he didn't have to move his feet. He reasoned that he thought he was normally ignorant, but maybe in fact the hireling is powerful, and then the claim that he will catch the necromancer is not an idle one either. The swordsman interrupted his own thoughts, saying that it could not be so, and that he was now thinking about the wrong thing. As soon as there was a chance, he would act according to the plan. Suddenly, the celestial demon asked the swordsman if those types were their enemies. He asked this purely out of interest. He talked about those things and added that they were already very disgruntled. At that moment, a whole pack of monsters appeared, saying they were invaders and ready to destroy them. The swordsman said they were skeletons, and these things are terrifyingly frenzied. The demon replied that they were. The dark swordsman couldn't believe his eyes because it was him. A giant skeleton swordsman thought there were even skeleton mages gathered here. The demon didn't know who the skeleton mages were and asked the swordsman about them. The swordsman thought he knew nothing and explained that those things had a 5th threat level. At this point, the swordsman was henpecked at. He thought that as a group, they could even defeat Wyvern. The demon told him to turn the sound down and keep the chicken on. It wouldn't take 20 minutes. I asked the swordsman if I killed those bony ones and whether those things would definitely fall out. He was referring to those items. The swordsman was shocked, thought he wasn't thinking about right now, and said he was blown away. The swordsman was shocked at what was happening, and at the fact that this little guy was not afraid of anything and was willing to fight monsters. The demon said he thought he would know the answer as soon as he killed them all and smiled. At that moment, the swordsman thought he was crazy. And even in a one-on-one fight, he didn't understand how he was going to destroy such a mountain of bones. The heavenly demon gathered all his internal energy. It rushed towards the monster squad with a frantic force, almost blowing the swordsman away. The dark swordsman couldn't believe what he saw. With his own eyes, he was in shock. When the celestial demon used its attack, the swordsman realized it was a demonic bloody hand attack. 10 years ago, he had been learning fire techniques with his teacher in the dark swordsman's dwelling. He tried to control the fire with his hand but failed. He's been trying his best for a long time and finally succeeded. Or rather, under the small teacher, He watched it from the side swordsman, tried his best, and said that just a little more. The teacher stood silent and realized that the swordsman could not do that today. The dark swordsman did everything he could to make it happen. The teacher told him that enough was enough, but the swordsman was very angry and upset at the same time. He turned to the teacher and asked about whether he was really going to fail. He asked what was to be done, but the teacher said nothing to him at that moment. He stood silent. After a while, the teacher told the dark swordsman to take his time and asked if he hadn't said that progress wasn't made quickly. He added that he also has so much internal energy that the technique stops at this point, which can be frustrating, but that's life's journey. He said that if he reached a certain level in martial arts, the side effect of his left hand would disappear. I decided to hold off on giving him any other techniques for a while, just in case. The swordsman couldn't understand why, as the heir to the demonic school, he shouldn't adopt all the techniques to revive it as soon as possible. But the teacher said that if there came a point where he couldn't control his left hand, he'll have to destroy it with his own hands, or he'll end up killing himself. He added that he would not be the only one there. He wondered what would become of the others, for he would certainly be a bad influence on the school. Finally, the teacher said that once he found a way to hold his left hand, he would continue to pass on the techniques, which would be safer for everyone. He said it would take at least 3 days for his inner energy to calm down and recommended rest. The swordsman thought that if he didn't learn to control his left hand, he would not become a true heir. He began to look for ways to help him restrain his left hand. It was tough. At that moment in the dungeon, the dark swordsman was shocked to find that this was the hand attack he was so eager to master. The heavenly demon used the demonic blood arm attack and used his right hand to strike. At the same time, I tell those bony ones to eat fire and die on the spot. With this very technique, he threw his fire with all his might at the monster squad. The fire had taken hold of the entire squad and completely surrounded it. All that was left to do was wait. After a few seconds, the fire consumed all the monsters in its path. They couldn't even move. The dark swordsman was shocked at what was happening and didn't understand how this could be. But the demon, with the help of fire, managed to kill only a couple of monsters, and the rest remained alive. He couldn't believe this was possible, though his body was weak, and decided to use more internal energy. At this moment, the most crucial skeleton was ready to strike back directly at the demon. He gathered his energy into a fist, spoke his spell, and prepared to attack. He threw all that power toward the heavenly demon with a single sweep of his hand, and the latter was trapped. Ku Otken was seized by this magic used by the main skeleton, but was able to escape. The dark swordsman saw everything happening and was very scared that his employer would die. But the sky demon just said that his uniform was all dirty because of that asshole. He got angry and struck back while asking if he knew how much she was worth. After his blow, he saw something lying on the floor that he couldn't understand what it was. As he got closer, he didn't realize what was there at first, but later, he decided it was a seashell. He picked it up and asked the mercenary if this was the sacred weapon he was talking about, but the swordsman shouted that it was there. The swordsman shouted for him to look forward, but the demon was calm and replied not to be so afraid. He added that he wanted to learn the demonic attack of the bloody hand, and suggested that he not take your eyes off him because that's what will happen. He said that he would show him the level 9 demonic attack of the bloody hand now. The heavenly demon gathered his internal energy and displayed a class, namely the palm of a bloody hand explosion. All that powerful fire energy rushed straight into the skeletons before them. It enveloped them all with such force that nothing could be seen and burned everything. The main skeleton that used his attacks was also destroyed, and all his knuckles were shattered. The fire filled absolutely every space in the dungeon and had such a powerful impact. They even reached the dark swordsman and the chicken standing beside him, who was in shock. The heavenly demon struck another blow at the head of those skeletons, and the bones continued to fall. He used another attack. It was a wheel of doom, and he threw it directly at the skeleton. He thought this creature was so resilient that it couldn't die and looked in its direction. He rushed and dashed towards those monsters to finally kill them. He ran so fast that rocks flew under his feet and threw shards of shrapnel at the swordsman. Dust and stone remnants flew at him, and he only had time to dodge. He stood and looked at what was happening. There was chaos all around, with rumblings of dust flying all over the floor, all coming from the heavenly demon. The demon thought he was looking at him, and immediately his memories flooded. He said he'd been through a lot of pain for a bony head a long time ago. He kept taking blow after blow and wondering why these skeletons were so tenacious. And as he struck another blow at one of them, he thought they were annoying too. The heavenly demon struck again. Everything around him burned with fire, and nothing could be seen. The dark swordsman was standing to the side, holding a chicken, and was very surprised at what was happening. When all the dust and dirt settled and what was happening around him became more or less visible, the demon realized it had defeated him. And he told his mercenary that he was done and they could move on now. He remembered to look around. He'd burned the place to the ground to see if any objects were left. He picked up some kind of vest, asked what it was, and assumed it was armor. The sky demon thought about putting on the vest himself, but the swordsman couldn't say anything and was shocked. The swordsman could not believe that the academy student had in no time taken down the monster. He thought that he was just a psycho, but it turned out he was still hiding his abilities. He figured this was no time to be surprised, and there was no way he wanted to fall behind in strength. When the celestial demon put on this vest, the armor took its body shape and sat just right. He told his mercenary that the armor fit perfectly and thought it was one of the items. But the swordsman told him not to make a fuss after he'd killed a couple or three monsters. He added that they are still at the very beginning of the second floor, and there are plenty more of these things ahead. He told the heavenly demon not to forget about their opponent and move instead after him. Ku-ok-ken was surprised at what he heard and couldn't understand what had suddenly happened to him. He quietly said that he pouted his lips because he had not received the trophy then. The swordsman thought he was a head above in terms of experience, although he was behind in terms of techniques. The demon told him to at least take the seashell. It was a shame to leave it behind, but the swordsman replied that he didn't need that useless thing. But after a while he agreed to take it because the demon told him that he had neglected his kindness. On the deepest floor of the dungeon sat the most critical monster. He was wearing a red robe and red lines ran from him all over the dungeon and floors. Along these lines ran an inner energy that nourished him and helped him gain strength. But even now that he was maxed out on internal energy, he felt it was too little. He thought that was all the internal energy those Marimians possessed. He added that he knew it was very little and insufficient to keep him full. And then he decided he still needed living sacrifices for his internal energy. He turned to his servant, Urver, who replied that he was listening attentively to his lord. He told him to stop the enemy who had already entered their temple, and Urver replied that he would. Then the head rose from his throne and went toward his servant to release him. He charged the energy with one wave of his hand and broke the chain to the servant, thereby freeing another 1,000 monsters that were ready to destroy the enemies. He told them to wake up and do their business, for which he had punished them. Immediately monsters with red eyes emerged from the ground, including skeletons. He pondered who would drop by this time and was very interested. At this moment, the punishment squad led by the Sword King continued their offensive and fought the monsters. The instructor gathered all his inner energy, put his hands on the warriors' shoulders, and began to defend them. Orders were given to protect the non-combatants, and the squad needed to cast a spell. One of the monsters is now fighting with Namgung-ho's leader, holding a blade. Namgung-ho defended himself with his holy weapon and told him who he was going for. He had already destroyed dozens of monsters, but they still had no end. He realized what a level 12 dungeon was really like. Naigun-ho couldn't afford to be a burden to the others and thought that if he fell, it was the end. He held on with his last strength and used his holy fire weapon. In a moment, the monster skeleton with red eyes jumped up and rushed straight at him, but couldn't get to him. Someone hit him from behind, and the skeleton shattered into 2 pieces. Uncle Namgung-ho helped him deal with that bony monster by punching it, and asked if his nephew was all right. At that moment, Namgung-ho stood with his sword burning in his hands. He said that the movements became very tense and clarified whether he was afraid, to which he replied that he was not. Uncle said that he could be understood because other dungeons are not even close to this one, and it's good to be nervous too. You need to control it. The leader apologized, and his uncle showed him that this fight would soon end. A squad of bony monsters was coming straight at them, but they weren't in a hurry to attack, just defending themselves. The Sword King then asked what had happened to those bony ones and if they were going to attack. And he added, "Have they developed the intelligence to be frightened?" He said they were no good to him, even as a warm-up. That's when I decided to test the abilities of the helmet the department chair gave me. At that moment, the helmet began to activate, and the eyes on the helmet remained closed. But after a moment, his eyes opened wide and a light spread out around him. It was aimed directly at the monster squad so that they would stop seeing the Sword King. The bony monsters could not understand what was happening or where the head of the squad had suddenly gone. It rushed past them with an unknown force. They noticed nothing and only looked for it around them. They thought he was standing before them, though the Ball King had long since stayed behind them and was preparing his sword. He drew his sword, and with it, a couple manipulations energized it and prepared to strike. The king and the sword were already ready to strike a decisive blow at this troop of monsters in a single motion. He made a couple swings of his sword and the monster squad went down, bones scattering in different directions. The punitive detachment suffered no casualties. The whole squad was intact, and the king said that meant it was the last. King asked how long it took them, and the instructor said about an hour. They were a little late and would have to hurry. Namgung. Ho said that before he could even blink an eye, he had crushed all the monsters with a single blow, and his uncle told him to keep his eyes open always. Uncle asked if the Sword King was okay. He said that so he wouldn't ask obvious things. Namgung Ho thought this was just a fantastically incredible power, and realized this was the transformation level. And he let his guard down just because of an underclass monster. He thought he couldn't keep up with the king's strength. He realized that he'd have to keep up with his pace a bit to get even stronger here. The Sword King said to move on and watch your step, and everyone agreed. On the other edge of the dungeon, the Dark Swordsman and the Heavenly Demon were advancing further. But at that moment, something alerted the Dark Swordsman, and he stopped to listen. He thought nothing was around and didn't realize if the monsters had recently come from here. The Heavenly Demon meditates and is filled with internal energy for further combat. The mercenary interrupted his meditation, saying he made a circle and returned to him. The swordsman asked what he was doing sitting cross-legged, to which the demon said he was circulating energy and asked about the situation ahead. The swordsman thought that such a technique of circulating internal energy was lost 140 years ago, but he replied that all monsters are similarly destroyed and can continue. The swordsman wondered what kind of power this type was hiding, but judging from his destructive combat, he had already reached the level of Kyokulkan. But at the exact moment, he thought that since his flames of demonic energy couldn't burn all the enemies, the level probably wasn't that high. A celestial demon interrupted the swordsman's thoughts, and he told the Ori to speed up because he was hungry. They were walking through the second floor, and not far away in the darkness, they noticed a skull lying there. The Dark Swordsman was surprised and wondered if something had changed in the dungeon, but what exactly? He realized that the landscape had changed here, and it appeared to be the source of the dungeon. They saw a slippery wall, and the swordsman assumed that the necromancer had had his subordinates build it. The swordsman said that it could be considered that the dungeon was just beginning, and there were monsters ahead that the lower-class skeletons were not even close to. The swordsman added that falling into a trap or barrier was also possible. He indicated that something had popped out in front of them, and they needed to get closer and look around. They walked further, and the demon thought it was spacious and cozy. The swordsman could not believe such a large-scale construction was made inside the dungeon. Demon noticed that there were some scribbles. The swordsman moved his gaze and wondered what it was. After some thought, he said it seemed like a pictogram similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics. But he was not sure, because if you crossed India and moved further to the west, there would be the Roman Empire, and if you went from there to the northwest, he did not finish. He was more interested in what the hieroglyphics were doing here. He thought it was some kind of stone plaque with obscure inscriptions and suspicious control panels. He added that he thought they had gone the wrong way. He suggested they turn around and go back. At this very moment, Ku Ok Ken remembered something. He was familiar with these characters. The swordsman said that no monsters were encountered along the way, but finding a new road would take time, and added that there must be another way here the moment a clucking sounded. The swordsman didn't finish his thought and turned to look. Suddenly, something clicked. The sky demon was already poking at the control panel, but the mercenary stopped him and told him to leave. He was asked not to touch these things. Little things can happen, and they can get trapped. He was also clarified whether he understood this writing. The demon said he thought some of the signs he could make out the swordsman didn't believe him. The sky demon immediately pressed one of the buttons on the control panel. The dark swordsman stood nearby and told him to see that nothing had happened after all. He added that they were lucky that no trap had been activated and that it would be good to head out soon to find another road. At that moment, the door they entered began to close and slide lower and lower. And with a rumble closed. Finally, the dark swordsman was very angry and scared of the demon. He saw the gate close, and he knew it was a trap and that it had activated. The swordsman was in a panic and said he needed to find a way out quickly, at which point his employer approached him, said he seemed to have triggered the mechanism. The swordsman was angry and replied that they were stuck there. The demon said if his eyes hadn't rolled out of his orbits yet, to look over there. There's a light. Suddenly, all those pictograms on the wall began to glow with magical flames. The swordsman asked what he had pressed. After all, he thought it wasn't a trap, but then it was as if the pictographs began to come alive and connect all the energy into one circle in the center of the text. From this circle opened a portal connecting the gate and the stone pictograph. The dark swordsman was very frightened by what he saw and angry at the demon for poking at the buttons. The streams of this portal entered the gate that had just closed in front of them, and there was a click. The swordsman was ready to run to close that portal. Suddenly, the streams of this portal disappeared, and a hole appeared in the wall where one could pass. When everything finally cleared, something on the wall looked like a gateway to another dimension. And at that very moment, the dark swordsman realized it was a teleportation gate. He couldn't believe that his employer had figured out the secret code of the dungeon in no time. The demon said it was a gateway to the other side, and he didn't understand how he figured out the secret code. And he added that, in a nutshell, it happened because he's too unbelievable. The swordsman suggested he look around first because it might be a long way, but he said he was busy and didn't have time. The swordsman stopped him and told them to look around first, but the demon told him to take the chicken and follow. The demon did not listen to him and entered this teleportation gate before the swordsman could say anything. He took the chicken and wondered what kind of lunatic would storm the dungeon so recklessly. He said screw it and jumped into that teleportation gate too. He was furious at his employer and wondered what could happen to him if he ever listened to him. He threatened that he'd pay off all his debts once they were done with the dungeon. They both ended up on the other side, and the pictogram reacted to that moment. The magical powers were dispelled, and with the help of those hieroglyphics, the teleportation gate closed. And now, on the 7th floor of the demonic ruins dungeon, something no one expected would happen. In the wall on the 7th floor, a portal opened into which the swordsman and the demon had just entered. The swordsman was thrown out of that teleportation gate like a ball and fell straight to the floor. He rolled a couple more meters and then stopped, swearing that he hit everything he could. He said it felt disgusting, like joints had been pulled out of his limbs and then put back in, and he was nauseous and couldn't breathe. He asked what kind of idiotic portal it was, and even though it was convenient, he wouldn't go there again. He realized it was the 7th floor, and he was glad he had memorized the dungeon map and figured the portal was connected to a pretty deep place. But he couldn't figure out where the hirer was, and thinking they had been thrown to different places, he shouted at him. The swordsman thought that he had had the misfortune to contract with a madman, and next time, he would only sign a contract after a good look in the eyes of his employer. At that very moment, the dark swordsman heard some crying from the darkness. He turned around and couldn't understand who it was.